am Candice Malcolm, and welcome to our live election kickoff event, our new show. I'm so excited about it. We're live here in Toronto studio, and sorry to keep you folks waiting for a few minutes. This is the first time we're using the studio, and we had a couple of little glitches, but you know what? It's election kickoff day. We were plunged into this election. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau went down to Ottawa today. He went down to Rideau Cottage and announced that we are going to have an election. And so we threw this show together sort of last minute, but we're so pleased that you could be here. We're so pleased that we've been able to take True North to this level where we can now do these kind of live broadcasts, that we can offer you the kind of coverage that you deserve, that you're not being offered, that you're not being given by the legacy media in this country. And we're going to break it all down for you on this show. We're going to be interviewing great guests. We're going to be we have a reporter in Ottawa who's going to be giving us the entire scoop and rundown of what's happened over there today, and we're going to unpack it all for you, the viewer at home. So thank you so much for tuning in and watching. I'd like to introduce you to some of my guests that are here, my friends that are in studio with me. So I'm joined by Sue-Ann Levy. Sue-Ann is a veteran columnist and investigative reporter. She's had an amazing career writing for the Toronto Sun, and we're so honored, Sue-Ann, that you retired rather than taking it easy and relaxing and just having a quiet life. You've decided to continue working in journalism, continue to provide the other side of the story. So it's an honor and pleasure to have you here. And
thank you.
And alongside Sue-Ann is our friend Anthony Fury. Anthony is the editor over at the Toronto Sun. And what is the name of the podcast that you host, Anthony?
Full Comment. That's my post media podcast. I got to say, I miss Sue-Ann so much as a Sun colleague, but I love contributing to True North. So it's awesome to see Sue-Ann here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for both of you for joining me in studio here in Toronto. And we do have Andrew Lawton, who's over in Ottawa, so we're going to be going to him in a few minutes. But before we do, I'm just a little perplexed. I don't know why we're having this election. I mean, we're still in the middle of COVID. I don't think COVID is over. I don't think the lockdowns are over. I wish they were. I wish that as a country we were at a place where we could say, okay, look, most people are vaccinated. Let's carry on with our lives. A few cases isn't going to destroy our country. But there is still a fear that we're going to have more lockdowns, that this thing is just not yet over. And I think that Justin Trudeau is making a huge mistake by putting us into this election, because it's Liberal voters who are still afraid of COVID, and I think that he might not get the majority that he truly deserves.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I look at it like for the past year and a half, some pretty crazy things have been done to people. Government has made edicts about our lives that most of us have never witnessed before in our life. So I'm like, I kind of, big fan of democracy. So I'm totally good with people having their say. I appreciate that the polling looks for Trudeau like, oh, maybe this is going to be good for me, which is why he wants it. And then Aaron O'Toole's going, oh, the numbers aren't so great for me. So maybe I'll say, can we push it back a little bit kind of thing. But I think you are right, Candice, totally, that the Liberal voter mindset is much more like, no, it's not safe to go and line up, outside with masks on for polling station and so forth. So they might actually pick up that argument. Like, I think it's safe to have people go into a polling station, do their voting and so forth, and the BLM rallies and the American presidential rally, everything was fine, it all turned out okay. But you're right that some of his key supporters might be like, what? I thought we shouldn't gather like this. So that's where it may backfire.
Well, and sorry, if I said that the majority that he deserves, that he thinks he deserves, I don't think I just want to be completely clear. I don't think that he deserves a majority. I don't think that he even deserves another minority. And I think that for him, he risks, like it's all or nothing for him. I think that if Trudeau goes in, like he launched this election, he forced us to have it in the midst of what could potentially be a fourth wave. And if he doesn't get his majority, and he only gets a minority, that's a loss for him.
Right.
Because we're spending, $610 million? That's the report of how much this election is going to cost. And what if we get right back to square one where we are back with another minority? I think that Trudeau will basically have to resign at that point, or at least he has no mandate to lead the country, and he's just put us into a ridiculous situation. I think that is the worst case scenario for him.
You have to eat crow, I think. And $610 million, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely outrageous. When, let's just remember, here in Ontario, for example, businesses are just not fully back. They are just getting back up to speed. They were locked down for some of them for almost 300 days, and they're trying to get themselves back on their feet. And I know in Toronto, in downtown Toronto, every second storefront has a for lease sign in it. And I think it's absolutely outrageous that our federal government's spending this kind of money when our poor small business and have suffered so tremendously. Let's not even talk about the number of people who've died because of COVID, the seniors, but the small businesses. I can't fathom the expenditure when these small businesses and have gotten very little help from the federal government.
Well, if anything, they have someone working against them, because I've heard so many anecdotal stories from business owners, here in Toronto, but around the country, about how hard it is to keep employees. Partially because employees are still collecting CERB, and it's like, why would you commute and go to work and have to put your time somewhere else if you can just get paid for free? And I mean, to me, that might be the biggest scandal of the entire COVID. I mean, there's a lot of scandals when it comes to COVID, but just this idea that Trudeau has launched this huge program that just hands out money to everyone. I mean, I can't imagine the kind of fraud that they're going to find if they ever do go through the books.
They already have, and there have been no checks and balances on who is actually eligible, who's collecting it. And you're right, the work ethic amongst Canadians, and I've heard it time and time again, people just say, why bother going to work? Here and in the States, they've done the same thing. They think, why bother going back? And I've seen signs everywhere around Toronto, hiring. But they're collecting these benefits, employees, so why should they bother?
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild. All right, well, we've got our colleague Andrew Lawton patiently waiting in Ottawa. I think he's just, jumping at the bit to give his report from what happened today. So let's not make you wait any longer, Andrew. Let's go to Andrew Lawton in Ottawa and hear about what happened today.
Hey, thanks very much for having me with you on this great evening. I'm very proud to be a part of this. Let's actually get right to it here and roll a package I sent over your way that has really what are some of the core themes that are emerging from this campaign so far, even just 12 hours into it.
Is his audio playing? I can't hear it.
It's playing. It should be playing for them. Just 1 second. It's not. No. Can hear us.
Should we try again, or?
Than would normally be expected in a general election campaign. Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives in particular have said they will be relying significantly on a studio they had purpose-built at a downtown Ottawa hotel. The fact that the election is taking place in the midst of what Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Theresa Tam, has called a fourth wave was very much front and center as Justin Trudeau took questions from the media and as Aaron O'Toole spoke. Justin Trudeau, who previously said that he would not have an election until the pandemic was over, was asked repeatedly by reporters what he wants to gain from this election and why now. Here was one such question from Toronto Star reporter Tonda McCharles.
You didn't use the word majority, but I know you would like a majority to enact that plan. However, the NDP says you have the confidence of Parliament. They'd support you in any of these measures that you talk about and all of these ambitions. So how can you justify to Canadians the need for an election that'll cost $500 million in the middle of a fourth wave when you said to Canadians you would not go to the polls before the end of the pandemic?
This is a really important moment in Canada's history. For the past 2 years, for the past 17 months specifically of the pandemic, we've been making really big, really consequential decisions. And in the last election, nobody was talking about what we might do in a pandemic. So the government, and indeed Parliament, needs an opportunity to get a mandate from Canadians, to hear from Canadians on how to end this pandemic, how to build back better in really meaningful ways. As Canadians know, this is a moment where we're going to be taking decisions that will last not just for the coming months, but for the coming decades. and Canadians deserve their say. That's exactly what we're going to give them.
Justin Trudeau didn't really talk about any of the safety issues. He didn't explain why an election in a pandemic is a good idea specifically. He just said that Canadians deserve a choice. That was the message he kept coming back to, that Canadians deserve a choice, the stakes are high, and how dare any of the opposition parties who don't want an election right now try to take away the right of Canadians to choose who represents them and who makes decisions that have long-lasting implications. Aaron O'Toole and Jagmeet Singh, the Conservative and NDP leaders, have very much been on team no election. And this was something that Aaron O'Toole reminded people of in his opening remarks this morning.
We're finally at a point, thanks to the efforts of all Canadians who've stayed at home, got tested, got vaccinated, where we can see our loved ones, our friends, and our families again. We shouldn't be risking that for political games or political gain. A leader who cared about the best interests of Canadians would be straining every sinew to secure the recovery right now. Instead, Justin Trudeau has called an election. That's Justin Trudeau's choice. And I hope that his decision doesn't cost Canadians too dearly. But let's be clear. This election is not about the next week, the next month, or even the next year. It's about the next 4 years. It's about who will deliver the economic recovery Canada needs.
O'Toole's message was very much that the Conservatives don't think there should be an election right now, but if there's going to be, they're going to run. And almost the entirety of his speech was about the economy, the Conservative campaign message of securing the future, the economy as it pertains to COVID recovery in particular. Not just the top issue, but it seemed like the only issue that the Conservatives were really incorporating throughout Aaron O'Toole's speech. Well, most of the media's questions towards Justin Trudeau were about why an election, what do you hope to gain? Aaron O'Toole's questions were overwhelmingly about vaccinations, specifically why the Conservative Party is not forcing its candidates and campaign staff to be vaccinated. Aaron O'Toole has previously said that these decisions are for individual people to make and not for him as a party leader to mandate. But that didn't stop the same question being asked several times over by reporters in attendance at Aaron O'Toole's press conference. But whatever the messages are, it's clear that after a summer of speculation, Election 44 is now in swing. From Ottawa, I'm Andrew Lawton.
Well, thank you so much for that report, Andrew. It was very thorough and comprehensive. It's so interesting how the media focus in on this vaccination issue for Aaron O'Toole. I didn't see very many policy questions towards Trudeau. But you know, we know that the media, they're kind of pack animals, so they're going to ask the same kind of questions. Can you give us any more insight? What was the mood like today? How were the leaders? Were they seeming relaxed, seeming nervous? What was it like?
It was odd because I really felt like today was a meta day in the sense that it was about all of these process elements and not really about the things that Canadians vote on. For Trudeau, it was about the timing of the election. For Aaron O'Toole, it was about the staffing situation he has insofar as vaccinations are concerned. Not really what I would suggest anyway are ballot issues. And for a lot of the reporters, the one thing I found, just to go along with the process side of this, is that there's a lot of confusion about what the campaign is actually going to look like. Remember, Justin Trudeau did very well, and I remember this in 2019 on the campaign trail with big crowds and rallies by getting into those groups and capitalizing off of some of the energy. This is not something that is really going to exist in most parts of the country, given public health restrictions that you noted earlier are still in effect. Aaron O'Toole has never really had that. I mean, he became the leader in the middle of the pandemic, is still the leader, and they're planning a campaign that is very much confined to that Ottawa studio that I was in this morning, which I think is interesting here because we know that if you're on that in that studio, the TV networks are going to carry you, but also not many undecided voters, I think, are watching those newscasts. So you got to wonder how they're going to break through that if they're not going to be on the ground in cities across Canada as they would be in a normal campaign.
It'll certainly be a different kind of an election than what we're used to. But from what I saw, Aaron O'Toole looked really comfortable. He looked very confident. I felt like he's really hitting his stride. Whereas, you know, from what I saw from Trudeau, he looked irritable and sort of angry. I'm really surprised by that because it's Trudeau's call, and surely the election is happening right now because they planned it this way. They've been spending boatloads of money trying to appeal to every different demographic. They want the majority before the books get opened and we find out too much. And so I found that a little strange. Like perhaps maybe Trudeau wasn't expecting those kinds of tough questions about why we're having a campaign in the first place. Tell us a little bit more about how Trudeau is doing today.
Well, I think you raise an important point there, which I just have to, I think, stress this for viewers, is that Justin Trudeau has known for as long as he's had the idea to have a summer election when the election was going to be. He's had the benefit of being able to plan and prepare, whereas the opposition could only speculate and guess. So for Justin Trudeau, even going back to the budget, I'd say there was probably a pretty clearly laid out plan of going to the polls at some point in the summer or fall, and then working back with what they're going to announce and when they're going to do it. For example, starting tomorrow, seniors in Canada are going to be getting a $500 check from the Liberals. I don't think that's an accident that the week of the campaign, there's literally going to be this massive exercise in vote buying. But here's the interesting thing, is that you can only plan so well. Trudeau launched his campaign on the day there's a major crisis in Afghanistan that involves a lot of Canadian negligence as far as repatriating some of these people from Afghanistan that have helped Canada's mission over there. There also is, even from within the government, from the advisor that Justin Trudeau has outsourced most of his public health decision making to, Theresa Tam, this declaration that Canada's in the fourth wave. And I think when all of these plans were made to go to the polls around this time, he probably thought that things were going to be a lot more hunky-dory than they are, but they had already committed to this path. And I think it ended up being a pretty bad day to start a campaign, just given all of the things that were working against the government.
Well, they're just so cynical, right, Andrew? I mean, it's like you could predict that there'd be another wave, right? We've been through this. We've seen it before. We know what's going on with, now it's the Delta variant. I think that Trudeau was at least hoping that the next wave wouldn't happen till the fall. When the weather gets colder, that's when it might happen. But the fact that it happened in the summer is interesting. And I want to change gears a little bit here, just to talk about some of your colleagues in the media, because I noticed that when you were asking your question, you were at the Erin O'Toole press conference there, and when you were asking your question, you got a bit of a snarky comment from Andrew Coyne, who's a senior columnist over at the Globe and Mail. So he didn't like the fact that you got the first question. And I just want to point out that your question was great. It was about China. And then correct me if I'm wrong, but the first question that Global News asked was about some dumb meme video. So Andrew Lawton with True North is asking the hard-hitting questions about China and about the things that Canadians deserve to know about. The legacy media is complaining that True North is there, and then they turn around and ask a dumb question, criticizing the leader about an ad that his party put out. Tell us a little bit about the interactions that you might have had with some of your colleagues there in Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't many of them, which I think is an important part of the story here. We know that the mainstream media is, generally speaking, bleeding significantly in resources. So the amount of people that are covering campaigns that are on the road is fewer and fewer, even fewer, I'd say, than in 2019, based just on a look at the group that was there today. And interestingly enough, people on Twitter have been making, thanks to Andrew Coyne and some other of the Blue Check Brigade that pointed this out, they've been trying to, claim some sort of conspiracy of sorts. The reality is the first person to walk up to the microphone asked the first question. And I just happened to be there early. I had a seat close to the microphone. And when they came time for the Q&A, I got up and I stood there, and that was that. But the interesting thing is that you do have these people in media, and we saw this in 2019, and I think we're going to see more of it this year, that really want to protect themselves as being the only conduit that can exist for information from politicians to voters through elections. But the reality is the audiences aren't simply there. So, Andrew Coyne, who I've always had a good rapport with, and some of the other blue checks that were jumping up and down saying, oh, how dare True North get a question in? They're not the ones that people are paying attention to this election.
Well, I don't want to toot our horn too much, but I think it is a good sign that, we're continuing I mean, the reason you got to ask the first question is because you worked harder. You worked harder than your colleagues. You were there before them. So, Sue-Ann, I saw you chuckling. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in on this one.
No, it's entirely predictable, though, that the media, and I encountered this a lot during my time at the Toronto Sun. If you asked a hard question, the legacy media would come down on you and try to actually mock you. And good for Andrew for getting out there in front. I think it's very sort of Trumpesque what we're seeing or what we're going to see, because the same thing happened in the States with Trump. I mean, he would get asked all these hard questions, and then Biden would be lobbed these softballs, and even to this day. So, I'm eagerly awaiting the same thing happening up here.
Well, it's interesting because I would say that definitely happened in the last election. But from what I saw today, I feel like the media were starting to push back on Trudeau. But what do you think?
It's only the first day, though.
Yeah, that's true.
I found, though, the answer to that question that Andrew played, that Tonda asked about, what's going on, why do we have this election? And Trudeau, I found him kind of like honest. And to unpack what he was saying, I feel like he was saying, all right, I want this great reset thing, so let's get a mandate on that. And I was like, oh, let's talk that out. Like that to me was kind of the subtext of what he's saying. I want to do the Build Back Better thing. I want to do the great reset thing. So, he's not going to use those exact words. He's referred to reset before. He hasn't put the great in, even though the Bank of Canada document that I was writing about does use those words. But whatever you want to call it, he's saying, I want to talk about where we go, making Canada more socialist or whatever country, and, more green agenda and all that stuff that he talks about all the time ad nauseum. And he's saying, let's talk it out here, Canada. And I think, I hope everybody's honest. I hope the media, the pundits are all honest that this is the direction. Trudeau's, I guess, very open about it. He's saying this is the direction I want to take the country in. So let's have that referendum, because I think that's an important thing. I think Trudeau might be surprised that out of the sort of Twitterati and so forth, that people don't actually want to head in that direction. But, they have the right. Where are we taking this country now? Because we are at a crossroads. So let's figure it out and let's have an open dialogue.
Yeah, I have heard that argument before, but to me, it's like we already have that direction. He's already got the mandate that he has, which is for a minority government propped up by an NDP, right? So that's already like his socialist agenda. I find it a little redundant that we're here, but I get your point, and I think that in some ways it is valid, because it's like, well, we're paying all this money, and that is something that has changed.
I don't think people know that, though. Like, I think people think that the Liberal Party is like a centrist party, and then you've got the left-wing NDP party, but there's really no difference. Like, I really feel for Jagmeet Singh, because, like, what's the difference between the Liberal and NDP party? Like, why vote for the NDP? There's no real value-added reason. You got two left-wing parties, and then the Conservatives are like the centrist and center-right party kind of thing. And if you really kind of hash it out more, people are like, oh, yeah, Justin Trudeau, pretty left-wing guy.
Well, I know. So I completely agree. I think that Jagmeet is totally lost, because, you had Trudeau running up to the left of Thomas Mulcair back in 2015, sort of famously saying that he was not going to balance the budget where Mulcair was. And that was sort of like, okay, this is interesting, because we have the Liberal Party outflanking the New Democrats on socialism, or at least on big government spending. And then Jagmeet Singh came along, and he was supposed to be this like new kind of youthful energy for the party. And he was going to bring all of these like new changes and sort of bring the party back to, I guess, more of its socialist roots. But I just feel like under Jagmeet, the party is not gaining momentum. I find him very uninspiring, and I'll address. We had a report over the weekend about Jagmeet Singh. He announced that him and his wife were having a baby. God bless them. That's great news, beautiful news. But the dress that his wife was wearing was a very expensive designer. It was a Zimmermann dress. These dresses cost thousands of dollars, right? And it's like, I don't care, right? It's their money. Sure. They can spend whatever they want. But just from an image perspective, this is a socialist party. And literally the day that they announced that, they put that picture up, they announced their platform, which was not costed, and it included a luxury tax, a tax on luxury goods. So here are these two people who are clearly like, part of the new rich elite or whatever. They're driving BMWs.
He's like a French socialist. That's how they are in France. They're all like very wealthy, the Francois Hollande people. They're like super wealthy. So he's kind of like, no, Jagmeet's wardrobe, he's a well-dressed guy. I mean, that stuff isn't cheap. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like, to me, it's just hypocritical because it's like, are you going to tax yourself? I don't know, man. To me, it's like it sends the wrong message, right? He did this profile with Toronto Life 2018 when he was the new leader. And it was all about how he wore these tailored bespoke suits.
Right.
And he goes all the way to Delhi for his tailor. And he has a collection of Rolex watches. Like, this is supposed to be the party of the everyman. This is supposed to be the working class party with the unions. And here you have this very slick looking, cosmopolitan guy. And I think it's great. I think that he could be a great role model for his community, or for all, for the entire Canadian country. Like, he's got a good following on social media. He's got a beautiful wife. He's got a lot going for him. And instead, what do we hear from him? We hear that Canada's a racist country and Canada's, terrible. The rich get richer. We need to crack down on the ultra rich. I'm just getting mixed messages from the guy.
He's not the union guy, though. He's like the new school kind of like millennial hipster champagne socialist kind of thing. And then there's a contingent of that. It's a sizable one, but he's not the kind of like traditional CAW, roll up your sleeves, hit the campaign hustings for the NDP kind of thing, like back in the 90s. It's really interesting to see. Yeah, I mean, that faction, I don't know where it's going. Like, Doug Ford worked really hard to win over some of those unions back in the 2018 election kind of thing. And Donald Trump fought to get those unions on side himself in 2016. So things are kind of like, they're splitting the NDP world.
Well, I know that Aaron O'Toole has sort of made it his point that he wants to target these people as well. Like, I know, actually, one of the things I liked about what Aaron O'Toole was saying was when he got like early Trump comparisons, Andrew Scheer was really squeamish about those. He didn't want anyone comparing him to Trump.
Right.
Whereas O'Toole didn't really flinch away from those. I mean, obviously Trump is a very flawed person, and there's a world of difference between Aaron O'Toole and Donald Trump. But when asked, he was like, no, I like the Trump coalition. I like how he went after, these sort of like steel or Rust Belt kind of voters, and I think that's what you're talking about, that the NDP has abandoned those. But I'm not sure if they're coming in the Conservative
The
side.
NDP and the Liberals, they're kind of becoming the party of no in terms of they're telling you everyone they don't want to associate. Whereas, if Aaron O'Toole becomes like the party of yes, of like, okay, well, we may not totally get along, or we're different culture, different religion, or I'm not in your union or whatever, but like we agree on this, that, and the other, and these are the important things today. Well, let's hang out, let's grab a beer, please vote for me, and let's form that coalition. So I think there are interesting coalitions that are happening, and the momentum can be in the Conservatives' favor, I think, to really, to broaden it. We used to talk about the big blue tent a lot, and I think there can be an even bigger blue tent.
Absolutely. All right, let's. We have a guest that's going to be joining us. I'm really excited about this one. So let's go to Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith is the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, a business advocacy organization. She was formerly the leader of the then Wild Rose Party of Alberta, leader of Alberta's official opposition. Before both and after her political career, Danielle was an Alberta journalist. Most recently, at the host of the talk show Danielle Smith on 770 CHQR. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
Hi, Candice. Nice to see you.
Here. So what do you think? We're going into an election. What are you hearing out in Alberta right now?
Well, I'm kind of alarmed that the Friday press conference isn't getting more coverage. I think what happened is everybody expected that they'd bring in a vaccine mandatory passport for those who were public servants. So people who worked in Ottawa, parliamentarians. I think we got blindsided by this vaccine passport that now is going to apply to airlines as well as cross-border travel by train and cruise ships. But they were pretty clear that it's going to apply to all federally regulated industries, which means if you look at what is federally regulated, oil and gas pipelines are federally regulated, grain elevators are federally regulated, the trucking industry is federally regulated, all of the broadcast media is federally regulated, all of the banks are federally regulated. And I'm a bit surprised that nobody seems to be making a big fuss about that we've essentially, on the 2 days before the election, have the government announcing that we're going to be bringing in a national mandatory vaccine passport with no end in sight. So that is one thing that I find pretty alarming. I saw earlier in the week that the Chambers of Commerce had lined up to support this. I just want you to know, as an advocate for business with my own group, Alberta Enterprise Group, not a single one of our members had called up asking for vaccine passports. I'm not even quite sure where the business community or members of the business community are coming from on that. But I find that pretty alarming that you'd see such a major change in policy, a bomb dropped on us in just a couple of days before the election when so much is going on. I don't know if people have had a chance to protest to really process it. Am I in the wrong direction on this? No, I just don't seem to see the kind of outrage I would have expected over this.
There was some pushback. I saw a huge protest in Montreal over the announcement that they had about bringing in vaccine passports, not allowing non-vaccinated people into public squares and into just the public in general. And I think maybe Canadians aren't paying attention, Danielle. I mean, it's in the middle of summer. Most people are probably up at the cottage or just not watching their television, not engaged on Twitter. And so I think maybe it's a bit of that. But I agree. I think it's a really scary direction that the country is going in, that just people, for whatever reason, people have their own reasons not to get vaccinated. I'm vaccinated, and I think that everyone should go ahead and get that. It makes life a bit easier and we can get on to normal. But the idea that the Trudeau government is implementing this sweeping vaccine passport, I think it's a pretty risky issue to bet an entire election on. And obviously it's designed, right? It's like a wedge issue. And I saw a couple of liberal strategists writing about it in the newspapers in the days before the announcement, saying, it's a great issue. It's an 80-20 issue, which is, when 80% of the population are for it, go for it. But it's like, well, but what about that 20%? Like this is going to be a pure tyranny of the majority situation where, you have 80% of the country forcing 20% of the country to either stay inside and not be able to participate in life, or to get a vaccine. Then they might have a moral issue or a medical issue or whatever the reason is for not getting vaccinated. I mean, aren't we a country of the Charter? I think you're right. I think it should be a big issue.
One of the things that I always observe is that no one ever really thinks about who does the enforcement on these things. Now, keep in mind, I run a restaurant. We've had 4,000 customers since we announced Freedom Day in Alberta on July the 1st. And so they're asking me as a business owner to ask my 20-year-old servers to be mandating that everybody flash their vaccine passport when they come in the door. If this applies to the trucking industry, are we seriously going to be asking for every single truck that crosses a border traveling from ports in British Columbia all the way across the country to be stopped at the border, to be checked to make sure that all of the drivers have been vaccinated? I mean, this is the thing that I don't think people understand, is that when you start putting in mandates, what follows is enforcement. And in France, what they're looking at is charging business owners 45,000 euros if they allow somebody in their business without a vaccine passport. They're talking about the potential for jail time if you go into a business without having your vaccine passport. And so this is where I think the disconnect comes in. Is there's one thing to support a high level of vaccination for the good of society, yes. But once you start putting in mandates and enforcement comes in, you're either asking business owners to do something that they are not prepared to do. They are not bylaw enforcement officers. They are not officers that get a mandate from their provincial or federal governments. Or you're asking for an excessive and aggressive use of force by your police services. And we saw all kinds of excessive use of force throughout the course of the pandemic. So I'm kind of astonished that this has been snuck in, because our premier in Alberta has been pretty clear that we don't want vaccine passports here. But the way they can do this through federally regulated industries, they can make it very widespread. They also admitted that because provincially regulated industries wouldn't have to comply to this, that they're working through Health Canada to put pressure on universities and others to try to bring through these kinds of mandates at the provincial level as well, where they don't have jurisdiction. So I'm wondering if this is going to be an election issue, because we also know that we've got third-party advertising rules. So anytime you talk about an issue that a particular political party has taken a position on, you've got to register under the third-party election advertising rules. Otherwise, you end up falling afoul of those Elections Canada laws, and they also have huge fines associated with it, $50,000 if you fail to register. So to me, it almost looks like they made this decision in the 11th hour, took everyone by surprise, so that there couldn't be any kind of organized campaign against it, because now we're in a writ period. And I find that sneaky, and I find it unconscionable that they would do something like that when it has such huge implications on freedom and huge implications on business freedom.
Points, and I just don't think that people have thought that through, Danielle, because you're right. It's one thing to say, look, everyone should just go get your vaccine and then we can all just go on and carry on with our lives. But it's another to imagine a society where you have police officers roaming around demanding that people show them their papers. I mean, is that really the kind of post-COVID world that we're going to live in, where we have enforcement officers making sure that, teenage servers at restaurants have actually been fully vaccinated. And I mean, it'll be interesting because I think, when it comes to places like Alberta and Ontario, both the premiers have said that they're not going to implement their own kind of, what you're doing is dividing society in half into haves and have-nots, and saying that some people just aren't welcome. Whether they're going to, enforce it and eventually like comply with it, I think it's really interesting. Anthony, so do you guys want to jump into the conversation here?
Well, I think Danielle just is making a great point that people haven't thought through the implications of it. Like, how long is this going to happen for? For how many years is that teenage server going to have to badger people, for their documents? And the other point, we're talking about booster shots now. I think a lot of people, they like the vaccine passport because they think it just validates the choice they have already made because most people are vaccinated. But what if come November, they're like, oh no, your vaccine passport's invalid until you get your third dose? And I don't know. Nobody's commented on that. Is that going to be? Apparently, Israel's brought in a third dose for over 40s now. And I was just speaking to someone I know there who's involved in politics, and they said, yeah, they may add it to their Green Pass system. So, let's just talk out these details a bit more, folks, before we jump in so eagerly.
Absolutely.
And it's just like the hotel quarantine, which was not thought through thoroughly. So it's another issue. I mean, we know how botched up that was, and people fined. So, and I'm really concerned, like your guest says, that I guess whomever is going to oversee this is going to run around, abuse their power, give huge fines like they did with the hotel quarantine. I mean, people fighting $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 fines at this point.
It's wild. Well, Danielle, I just want to ask you one more question before we let you go. You're out west, and you have your finger on the pulse of the sort of mood and the vibe out there. Do you think the Western alienation is going to play a role in this campaign? I mean, I know that in the last 2 years or the last 5 years under Trudeau, we've seen it flare up worse than ever, perhaps, or at least in the last 20 years. And I haven't really heard much about the sort of Western separatist movement recently, but I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of an update on what the mood is like in terms of this issue.
Well, let me add one more issue to the list, because again, in the dead of summer on July 20th, the Natural Resources Minister, Seamus O'Regan, launched a just transition consultation. Just transition is the language that the extreme left, like Naomi Klein and others, use to talk about phasing out fossil fuels altogether and retraining energy workers to, I don't know, install solar panels or do sustainable farming or something. Imagine if the head of Unifor, Jerry Diaz, was told that the government was going to phase out all auto workers' jobs. People would be lighting their hair on fire all the way through Ontario and abroad. And yet we're, I guess, just supposed to nod and smile and accept this in Alberta. So I can tell you that the combination of the opposition that the federal government has taken to our premier on so many issues, combined with essentially campaigning to phase out our energy sector, combined with giving $6 billion to Quebec for their daycare plan and not allowing Alberta to have a similar deal. We have an equalization referendum that's going to be happening a month after the federal election. And if the Prime Minister chooses to campaign on divide and conquer, I suspect that's going to have a very strong mandate. But beyond that, if you look at what's happening in the election, there is a party that is headed up by Jay Hill, a familiar name out east, because he used to also be the whip for the Conservative parties underneath Stephen Harper. He's headed up the Maverick Party, and it is a separatist party. He's running, I think he said 26 MPs. They've carefully selected the ridings where they think that they can run a Maverick without causing a vote split that will elect a Liberal. So ridings with people like Michelle Rempel and Shannon Stubbs and John Barlow. I don't know if they're going to be successful. I don't know if they'll be able to have that kind of breakthrough. But the kind of issues that the Prime Minister has chosen to campaign on are not unifying issues. We have a $600 billion COVID debt. It's going to require all hands on deck in all industries working flat out to try to address that and turn the corner. And you don't get there by getting the rest of the country to dogpile on Alberta. And I think the way this campaign is shaping up, he's going to do that. And we're going to end up with some serious long-term unity problems as a result.
Well, it's such a Trudeau, it's like 60 million, 600 million, $600 billion is what this guy spent on the pandemic. It's staggering. And, for Alberta's sake, I hope that he doesn't campaign in this divisive way. But, we've seen it so many times before. Danielle Smith, thank you so much for joining us. You provide so much information, so much context. We really appreciate you coming on our show.
My pleasure. Talk to you again.
Pretty wild when you think about the fact that we're talking about an election that might cost $600 million and $600 billion for a pandemic. I mean, you can't really imagine what it's going to look like, and hence why Trudeau has said that he's not going to be able to balance the budget until 2070. Well, my producers keep they keep waving at me because I'm supposed to be making fundraising pitches. So we're focused so much on the Trudeau government and their waste of money. I was surprised that I was waiting for Danielle to raise the $600 million media bailout, but she didn't mention that. There's too many other spending things to mention. But we don't get any money from the government. We're not part of that media bailout. And it's not just the $600 million. We learned that there's a local journalism initiative that $50 million was given to journalists. We just learned last week that there was another program where journalists got $60 million during the campaign in emergency relief. So there's no end in the amount of money that the Trudeau government is sending to the mainstream media. And that's aside from the $1.2 billion that they give to the CBC. So I just think it's so important that Canadians hear from independent voices, that there are journalists out there that aren't part of the parliamentary press gallery, that aren't part of the media bailout package. And that's why I think it's just so important. If you support the work we do at True North, if you want to see more of these podcasts, more of our reporters, that you head on over to tnc.news/donate and consider making a donation. We're trying to raise a lot of money to give you the kind of election coverage that we think that you deserve. And, it takes a lot. And I'm so proud of the fact that we have so many people across the country that believe in us, that believe in True North, that they're willing to open up their wallets. It really does mean a lot, especially, during this economy with so much uncertainty. It really does mean a lot to us. And so we are eternally grateful. And, True North is growing. It's great to see. We have a team of interns that are now working, helping us break news stories, writing up reports. We were able to get Sue Ann Levy, one of the most famous journalists in Canada, one of the most accomplished journalists on our team. And again, just the fact that we can recruit someone so high quality, it says a lot, and I'm incredibly happy with the way that things are going. And we're going to be doing more of these shows as well. This is sort of a trial run for us. This is the first time we've done anything like this in a live studio. And our goal is to do more of these kind of programs, to bring you more news, to do these kind of shows anytime there's something of interest. So we're going to do another one just like this on the night of the English debate, and then we'll be here again on election night on September 20th doing a very similar kind of show. So we've got a lot of exciting news planned. We've got lots of reports coming. We've got a bunch of breaking stories that we're going to be putting out throughout the campaign, starting 2 days ago, we were the first one to break the news that Pierre Lemieux will not be running as a Conservative, and we've got a bunch of other scoops coming down. So, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting our journalism, and thank you to Anthony and Sue Ann for being here in person. So, what do you think the ballot box issue is going to be in this campaign? We were just talking to Danielle about this pandemic passport thing, and I haven't really wrapped my head around how disastrous it could be, but
yeah.
The Liberals want to make it that.
Yeah.
You know that. But, I was thinking as you were talking and as Danielle was talking that there are people who've had a really bad reaction to the vaccine. My neighbor had a clot in his heart. So there are reasons that some people are not taking the vaccine. And I think I'm fully vaccinated. I got it in Florida because they were so slow up here. Mm-hmm. I think what happened was outrageous up here. And the fact that some people have had to mix vaccines, mix brands, and may not be able to travel because of it or go to certain countries because of it is outrageous. I think we should be talking. Elections, are typically not time to talk about policy. And there's
Right.
always that sort of cut and thrust kind of, he did this today, he behaved this way, he said this. But we really I think Canadians are crying for some idea of what happens next, because we were in lockdown for over a year. And, people have suffered tremendously, whether it's health-wise, our health system suffered, People suffered, businesses suffered, and I want to see a leader, I know from my own perspective, and I'm sure you feel the same way, both of you, who's going to be able to guide the country out of this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the frustrating things, I always wanted to hear more from Aaron O'Toole on all of that, because when we were in, that second wave lockdown or third wave lockdown or what have you, all throughout, I mean, it was really a nation calling out for leadership, and the governments failed, whether it was Justin Trudeau or Doug Ford, but the opposition leaders failed too. I mean, wherever we were federally, provincially, I just felt like opposition leaders dropped the ball. I mean, the job of opposition parties is to oppose, to come up with other ideas, alternatives, to point out the weaknesses in it. But all we ever got was like, oh, well, can we do more lockdowns? There were questions of, Andrew talked about how, process questions are such a big thing. And that was really the only way, like Aaron O'Toole would criticize the lockdown situation, was questions of process. How are we going to deliver the vaccines? How are we going to stop these planes coming in and so forth? Rather than let's step back and say, like, is this really what we want to be doing as a nation, to our fellow citizens and so forth? And it looks like he wants to have that conversation with mandatory vaccines and vaccine passports, which is great. But we got to see more of that, because to Sue-Ann's point, I mean, leaders lead. You got to step up. What makes you different? What's the value added component? So I wonder if we'll see that. Also, we see just events come in and change things. The classic things during an election, like what's happening in Afghanistan right now, like totally like last helicopter out of Vietnam situation. This is crazy stuff, and obviously the Liberals didn't expect this to. Well, they should have foresaw something like this in Afghanistan happening around about this time. Kind of naive of them, but crazy stuff could still happen in the next 5 weeks. So I don't know what the ballot box question will be.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I remember the 2015 election when it was the Syrian refugee issue
Right.
that really came to the forefront, and it led with this idea that Harper hadn't let in this one family, and then they ended up sadly drowning in the.
It was the
Aegean
picture of
Sea or
that boy
something.
Alan Kurdi, the 2-year-old.
Exactly. Yeah, and that really, Trudeau had this very generous Syrian refugee policy. People already had this impression that Harper was kind of cruel and mean-spirited or whatever,
Right.
and which not true, but that's sort of the perception the Liberals tried to paint of him. And then I really do think that swung the election. So
Yeah.
it's a good point. I'll just kind of disagree with you, because I actually think Aaron O'Toole's been doing a pretty good job. I think that he's shown incredible discipline in not jumping into the issues that he doesn't want to. So I see that he has made a strategy that he wants to run as he wants to be an economic guy. He wants to run on the fiscal issues. He doesn't want to talk about cultural stuff. He doesn't want to talk about social issues. When it comes to sort of non-economic policies, he's pretty good on China. And otherwise, you see him kind of not really standing out in any way. And that's frustrating for people like me, people like you. But
Right.
I think that's the strategy. I think that the idea is, we've had too many elections that have been lost by conservatives because of social issues. Cultural issues are divisive. Let's try to run a campaign on the economic issues, which we're solid on. And Trudeau is a total mess. And so, what I see is sort of the strategy that they're kind of doing this in a way to really show that the thing that they want, the thing that they care about, is the economic side of the equation. Trudeau's finances are a total mess, as we were talking about. And so I think that O'Toole's been doing a pretty good job. And from what I've seen so far, just, today, he seemed confident. I think that he's really hitting his stride as leader.
No, he is prime ministerial in his presentation. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I want to announce something really exciting that we have going on at True North. We have decided to bring on and hire an in-house pollster for the duration of the campaign. We want someone who is able to provide analysis, give us a better understanding of the demographics of the country, figure out which ridings to look out for, where the election is going to be fought, where it's going to be won. So I'm tremendously proud, excited to announce that Hamish Marshall will be joining True North as our in-house pollster. And unfortunately, Hamish is at the cottage because, who would have known that the election was going to happen today in the middle of August. But fortunately, I was able to catch up with Hamish a couple of days ago before he left, and he really just provided a lot of context about what he's going to be doing for True North, and give you a little bit of a sneak peek as to what you can expect from True North through this campaign. So let's play that interview, please. We are incredibly excited to announce that True North has hired Hamish Marshall as our in-house pollster for the duration of the election campaign. Hamish, welcome to True North. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Candice. It's fantastic to be here, and it's great to be working with your amazing team.
Well, thank you. Before we get into the questions, I just want to tell the viewers a little bit more about you, Hamish. You are a partner at One Persuasion. You were the Conservative Party's national campaign manager in the 2019 federal election. You ran Andrew Scheer's winning leadership campaign, and you were also Prime Minister Stephen Harper's pollster who helped the Conservatives win that majority government in 2011. Hamish is one of the brightest guys in the country, and it really is an honor to have him on our team. Did I miss anything there, Hamish?
Well, it was actually 2008 that I was the national pollster, but
oh, sorry about that.
Just want to be accurate. But no, that's great. I live in Toronto and hang out with my kids a lot, and it's wonderful to be here.
Great. Well, let's get into some questions then. So, why did Justin Trudeau trigger this election?
Because he wants to win a majority. That's the only thing this election is really about at core, is Justin Trudeau trying to win the 14 or 15 more seats he needs in order to win a majority. That's why it's happening.
I mean, how is that really a ballot box question? Like, how is that a proposition to Canadians? Do you think he'll be punished for being so callous and saying, we need an election because I want to get a majority government?
No, I actually don't think he's going to be punished. There's been some research done by other pollsters on this. The vast majority of Canadians say it doesn't really bother them having an election. People are generally fairly happy with how Trudeau has handled COVID, but I think more than anything else, what's making things different this snap election as opposed to sort of any other random snap election is the idea that whether however the fourth wave plays out, COVID's clearly we're coming to the end of the COVID interruption in public life, and there's a natural sense that perhaps something different or new will happen afterwards, and therefore having an election to kick that off, to have a new government, or maybe it's the same government, who can take the country through whatever it is that comes post-COVID, makes some sense to people. So I don't believe he's going to be punished by this at the moment.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, you talked about how this is the sort of post-COVID election. So much of our lives have changed since COVID. Just in our way of life, or economy, what we're used to. How will that impact this election? Like, I know there's some talk about voter turnout might be lower because people are afraid to kind of go out into public, or maybe they're just not as motivated because they don't really see a need for a change. How do you think it will impact this election?
Well, I think primarily COVID's going to impact the mechanics of the election. So I think it can be, depending on the province and depending on the city and the rules that are imposed. You could see quite a lot of door knocking in some places and not a lot in others. You could see some parties wanting to engage more digitally and others still wanting to do things face to face. And whether or not the number of people who feel comfortable opening their door to a stranger to have a conversation about politics on their doorstep is probably going to be lower than it is normally. So that makes things a little different. The other thing which isn't clear so far is whether Elections Canada will have to make more accommodations because of the pandemic. Will there be more? Will they be pushing the ability to vote by mail? Anybody can already vote by mail. It's a pretty easy process. But will Elections Canada be investing a lot of money in advertising to really make that option very, very well known? And of course, there's always the potential of, if the fourth wave becomes very severe, of some sort of delay or something, as we saw in the Newfoundland election a little while ago, where the election kept on getting delayed by weeks and weeks and weeks, and the whole thing descended into farce. So I think it's more around the mechanics. I think turnout was going to be down in this election anyway. While I think Trudeau's got a good shot at a majority, I don't think there's a vast amount of enthusiasm there. There isn't a huge desire for change. The desire for change is lower than it was in the past. Usually desire for change is one of the main things that increases turnout. So I think we're going to experience a lower turnout election than we've had in the last couple, say.
Something you said just made me think, do you think that there will be election integrity issues? I know that was a big issue down in the States for their 2020 campaign. We did hear a lot, not recently, but about a year ago, about the potential for foreign meddling in the election. You don't really hear that storyline too much anymore, but is that something that you think that Canadians should be concerned about?
The vote by mail system that we have in Canada, and look, this could change if circumstances change, but I probably can't, frankly, in the middle of an election. The system we have in Canada depends on people requesting a vote by mail ballot, not having the ballot sent to them. And I think that's a key part in election integrity, that somebody has to request it and then send it back. Look, there's always the chance that some people will fiddle around with the rules and try to break the rules somehow. But that's going to happen in any election where there's tens of millions of people involved. There's always going to be some skullduggery. But frankly, I think the way we've got the things set up right now minimizes the chance of election integrity issues. But there's always a chance of something.
Hamish, you're the expert when it comes to understanding Canadians, the demographics, and the numbers. So why don't you help us get a better idea of where this election is going to be fought and potentially where it's going to be won? We know that the Liberals tend to do very well in Eastern Canada, that the Conservatives can rely on the prairies. What about the rest of the country, and where should Canadians look to really understand how this campaign is playing out?
So I think this is an election, if I was sitting in Liberal campaign headquarters, who are the people calling this election, and we're trying to figure out how to get a majority, how to pick up, say, 15, 16 seats. They've got a few seats extra. I mean, they want 20, but let's say they want 15 or 16. I'd be looking at where those seats are. And it's very different circumstances than face the Conservatives or the NDP or the Liberals in past elections, where it's about winning a large number of seats in one area and switching, having a breakthrough in an area and winning a large group of seats. When you're looking to pick up, a dozen, 15, 20 seats, it's about finding them in ones and twos and threes. So I think we're actually going to have a very, a bit of a different election from that perspective. It's not about, for the Liberals, it's not about how do I win 15 more seats in the 905 or something like that. It's going to be, okay, here's 3 or 4 seats in BC. I think we've got a chance at winning. The Liberals don't have any seats in Alberta. Calgary, Skyview's got to be at the top of their target list. They're running a good candidate there. Calgary Center's always on their target list. There's Edmonton Center, and you might say, well, maybe the Liberals can only pick up 2 seats in Alberta, but when you're only going for 16, 15, or 16, 2 is a good chunk of that, right? The Liberals just announced they've got a very, very strong candidate, the former NDP MLA in Northern Saskatchewan. He's been an MLA there for 20 odd years. He's running the Northern Saskatchewan seat. That's a seat that, that's probably the only seat in Saskatchewan the Liberals have any chance of winning, and people can write it off. But no, if you only need 15, one each seat's important. So I think what you're going to see is a very atomized strategy where Liberals are going after, so the prairies. The Liberals might only pick up 3 or 4 seats in the prairies, but that might be a quarter of what they need or 20% of what they need overall. Add another 2 or 3 in BC they can pick up, 2 or 3 in Quebec, maybe 2 in Atlantic Canada. Suddenly you're getting, you're in the low teens, and you only need to pick up a few, 3 or 4 or 5 in Ontario. So it's not going to be all about, for the Liberals, it's not going to be all about we just have to win the 905 or win this one area. It's going to be all these atomized little races around the country, which is going to make it sort of interesting and a little bit different.
Interesting. Okay, so what about the Conservatives? Which demographics do they need to appeal to win? Who do they need to win over in order to have a chance at winning this election?
So I went and looked at how the Conservatives are doing now versus how they were doing when Stephen Harper won in 2011. And it's quite striking the difference. Look, Conservatives have to do better with every group. Typically speaking, older men are from a demographic perspective, are the most reliable conservative voters. And the Conservatives, depending on the poll, have somewhere 40-odd% of that vote, 40, 45, 47, depending on the different pollsters. But when Harper was, winning this majority, Conservatives got probably close to 60% of that vote. So even in that core group, they need to grow that by 8, 10, 12 points. So they need to grow everywhere. But what the most striking thing is the change among women, especially women over 35. So when Harper was winning majority government, when Harper won his majority government, women over 55 voted Conservative, not as much as men over 55, but by a pretty good number, and Conservatives regularly won that group of voters. That group moved to Justin Trudeau in a big way in 2015, and the Conservatives have never been entirely able to get that back. And the other interesting thing is the group of women in sort of middle-aged women, 35 to 55, moms with kids at homes. Harper at his best days was able to win that group, but not by a lot. But even in an election that, he didn't win a majority, some of his minority wins, he was able to sort of at least tie Liberals with that group. Now the Conservatives are, 15, 20 points behind that group, again, depending on which pollster you look at. And, look, winning middle-aged women is not something that Conservatives need to win that group by a huge amount, but they can't lose. They have to tie with that group. And that's the big problem. They need to be able to tie with middle-aged women and win older women, or just win women over 35 in general. And without that, path to victory is going to be difficult.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to think about what kind of policies the Conservatives could use to appeal to those kind of demographics. The Liberals are making a lot of hay about their childcare announcements and the idea of having these national government-run daycare initiatives. Clearly, that is aimed at that. Mom demographic with kids at home, but it's hard to put your finger on what the Conservatives have to counter that with.
Yeah, look, I think that group, they're interested in the members of that group that are open to voting Conservative, who aren't voting Conservative today, are interested in many of the same things that other voters who are interested in open to voting Conservative are. And the most important thing is going to be a clear message and a clear vision of what voting Conservative means.
What about New Canadians? I know that part of the big 2011 majority rested on the 905, which is this suburban region around Toronto, and this idea that a lot of New Canadians were finally voting Conservative. Is that still the case? Do you see that at all in your polling?
So Chinese Canadians are historically have been an enormous source of strength for the Conservatives. Conservatives won the Chinese Canadian vote clearly in 2011. Still won it in 2015, and in 2019 won it. Of the four ridings, the most number of Canadians of Chinese origin, Conservatives won 3 and missed the fourth, missed one other one by 200 votes. So it's a strong group. Chinese Canadians are more likely to vote Conservative than white Canadians. Other groups have not been as strong for the Conservatives. In 2011, when Conservatives won the election, tied the Liberals with Indo-Canadians effectively. That was a huge victory in many ways, because tying with the group that's been typically pro-Liberal was a source of a great deal of success. Everything we can see right now in 2019 and subsequent to then is that Conservatives are a long way behind with that group. The big question, is going to be whether they'll be able to hang on to the Chinese Canadian vote, and that's going to that takes effort. It can't be taken for granted.
Interesting. All right, we talked a little bit about the Liberals. We talked a little bit about the Conservatives. Let's talk about the NDP. The sort of conventional wisdom is that the better that the NDP does, the worse it is for Liberals, better it is for Conservatives, and that if a Conservative is doing really well and it's close, then Liberals will fall back on their time-honored, tested strategy of scaring NDP voters into voting for a Liberal. So how do you think Jagmeet Singh will play out in this election? Will he potentially be a spoiler, and what are his odds looking like?
Yeah, I think Jagmeet Singh's done a decent job in the last 2 years of making himself a safe harbor for disgruntled Greens, which have many reasons to be disgruntled these days, and Liberals, progressive voters. The overall people right now, advocates just did a poll. People think Liberals are going to win the election. 45% of people think Liberals are going to win, compared to only 18% people think Conservatives are going to win. Only 9% of NDP voters right now think that the Conservatives are going to win the election, which means that unless things change dramatically, the Liberals' ability to scare those NDP voters with the prospect of a Conservative victory is reasonably smaller than it has been in the past. That can be very, very good news for Jagmeet Singh, because allow him to pick up 2, 3, 4% perhaps in some key ridings. The question becomes for him is, well, I've no doubt that will buoy his overall popular vote number, especially in Ontario. It's not clear to me that it will result in many more seats, especially in a lot of these seats in the 905. The NDP going from 17 in a 905 seat to 21%, might be enough. Maybe it's a split that will help the Conservatives, depending on the circumstances. but it certainly isn't enough for the NDP to win. They're so far back in many of these 905 seats, and that's the big thing. So will the NDP get more votes? At the moment, it looks that way, but will it turn into dramatically more seats? I'm sure it'll turn into a few more seats, but will they go from the 20 something seats they won last time to 30 or 40, 35 or 45 seats? At the moment, I don't think it's looking that way.
All right, I got a few more questions for you. The first one is, NDP tends to be a spoiler for the Liberals. There's been a couple of new upstart right-wing parties out on the horizon, and I was wondering if you could give the viewers some understanding of whether or not any of those parties have a shot at, spoiling a potential Conservative MP and making them lose because of splitting the vote on the right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's potential. I mean, in 2019, the People's Party, Maxime Bernier's People Party got 1.6% of the vote nationwide, and depending how you want to count it, cost the Conservatives 6 or 7 seats. So not enough to fundamentally change the nature of the election, but it certainly would have been a stronger result. So they can certainly have an impact there on a few seats. The question for me is, we've seen the Maverick Party, the rebranded Western Independence Party. We've seen them. They've got 20-something candidates nominated. They seem to be running primarily in seats where they're not likely to make a big difference. They don't have a candidate in Edmonton Centre, I believe, for instance. So the chances, if they're running a candidate in some rural Alberta seat and the Conservative MP gets, 80% of the vote instead of 85%, doesn't make much of a difference. So they don't seem to be making much of a difference. The question on the People's Party is, the People's Party, as far as I can tell, seems to have morphed from being an populist anti-immigration party to sort of a populist anti-vaccination party. And whether they'll be able to profit from that is unclear to me. They might very well be. There's a lot of people who've got a lot of concerns about vaccination, and then they could very well go for the PVC. The interesting thing is those voters are no more likely, are not significantly more likely to be Conservatives. In fact, we've seen public research that shows that the voters who are most likely to be concerned about vaccinations are actually middle-aged women who are more likely to vote Liberal. So if the PPC with the right candidate can tap into some anti-vax sentiment in some constituencies, the chances of that will disproportionately hurt the Conservatives, I think, is actually relatively low. I think they'll draw from everybody. The one obvious exception is Maxime Bernier. Maxime Bernier running in the Beauce is always a threat and shouldn't be taken for granted. Although I think, the Conservative MP there, Richard Lehoux, is very, very strong and very well liked and has a very strong local record. And my suspicion is that Bernier is going to actually have a harder time than he did last time, but he can't be ignored.
It's interesting, Hamish. I always thought of the anti-vaccination campaign as a fixture of
the big question for the Conservatives is whether they'll basically run an election saying, let's deny Trudeau his majority, versus left of them what to do. And that further confuses the issue. So I think there's layers upon layers into this vaccine hesitancy or outright anti-vax activism.
Interesting. Yeah, and we'll definitely continue to unpack that throughout the campaign. All right, Hamish, final question here. So what is the ballot box? I know it's early days, the campaign was just announced, but looking at things now, is this election going to be fought over COVID management and spending, or are Canadians sick of that? And are we going to have, some other issues that come to the forefront? What do you think the ballot question will be in this election?
Well, I mean, I think at core of the ballot question is, does Trudeau deserve a majority? And that's really what his core message is going to be. It's going to be he deserves a majority because he's got all these big plans. And if it's fought over COVID management, I think he's happy with that ground as well. There was a survey the other day, Angus Reid did a survey, it said 51% of Canadians think that the PM has done a good job of managing COVID. In that same survey, I think the Liberals at 36%. So 15% of people who aren't even voting Liberal think he's done a good job. So this is a very, that's the ballot question. They'll be very, very happy about that. the question is, the big question for the Conservatives is whether they'll basically run an election saying, let's deny Trudeau his majority versus, elect a Conservative government. Which that's a big strategic trade-off, and we'll see what they do. But I see it this as, does Trudeau deserve a majority? Time for a change numbers are lower than they were 2 years ago. Trudeau is more popular today, not dramatically, but he is more popular today than he was before the 2019 campaign. The view of the country is generally better than it was then. So I think as a ballot question, it's not a bad one for the Liberals, and that's why we're having an election right now, is because they think they can win on those terms.
Well, thank you so much, Hamish. You've been very insightful, and I know I'm personally excited to have you joining us throughout the campaign. I know our viewers will too. What can we expect from you throughout this campaign?
Well, I'll be joining you on some shows. I'll be writing a little bit for True North, and we should have some interesting proprietary research that's exclusive to True North, which hopefully will shed some light on things that the mainstream media isn't covering.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having you on the campaign.
My pleasure.
So happy to have Hamish Marshall joining the team. Andrew Lawton here from Ottawa, where the election call was going down today. And we've talked a fair bit this show about the bigger picture, higher level aspects. I want to get into the weeds in just a moment. We've got a couple of Conservative candidates standing by. We'll get to Garnet Jennis in a couple of moments and Kathy Wagenthal in just a moment. But I do want to tell you, all of these things that we're doing here are so important in a media landscape that is so often not favorable to the issues that those of you watching, those of you who subscribe to True North, pay attention to. I'm in Ottawa right now. I didn't walk here. I've got to get back home. Even traveling around to be where the story is comes with a cost. If you can chip in to support our election coverage, please head over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. And we love that you're watching. We love that you share it. It's so important. But again, we have to be able to make this coverage happen for all these people that are going to be receptive to these issues, but just aren't exposed to us. And that's why we're so glad to be doing this and covering this campaign. Kathy Wagenthal is a longtime Conservative member of Parliament in Yorkton, Melville, Saskatchewan, and now the Conservative candidate in Yorkton, Melville, one of those technicalities of an election. Kathy, good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Let's start with what I think in a lot of context to the media is the elephant in the room, which is the fact that the Conservative Party of Canada has in the caucus a number of social conservatives, a number of social conservative voters in Canada of conservative persuasions and sometimes not conservative on other issues. And we were told in 2019 that these were issues that just shouldn't be entertained in an election. And I know there's been a fair bit of discussion within the party on this. You've been a very prominent voice in the Conservative Party and in Canada on social issues. You introduced a really very unique and I think a very important bill not that long ago dealing with sex-selective abortion. What's your message to Canadians that are oftentimes conflicted about these issues based on kind of what they're told to think about them from the media coverage of campaigns?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. They are told certain things by the media. And what I have found in being out amongst Canadians on this issue is that they are not polarized the way the media and some political parties would like them to be in regards to the issue of abortion, specifically on certain issues. And sex-selective abortion is one that 84% of Canadians want a law against. So clearly, when you're talking about that critical mass, that is a significant number of Canadians that go well beyond the borders of the Conservative Party and obviously into many other parties as well. So what we have here is an issue that I would like to see dealt with in a way that pleases Canadians. There's no laws at all in Canada around abortion, and there are certain things that are important to Canadians that they want to see those limitations there. So I think our problem, as you probably saw if you did follow the bill at all, is that it isn't Canadians that are the problem. It's the other political parties that have set parameters on anyone who wants to run in their party, to have certain perspectives on these issues, or they can't even run. And that to me is not democracy, and they're no longer reflecting the views of Canadians.
One thing that I would point out here that I found interesting this morning at the very first hour of the campaign, one prominent Liberal MP, Bardish Chagger, had jumped in and made some comment about how Aaron O'Toole lets his caucus vote in accordance with their conscience, as though that's a criticism. And I'm curious if you could explain the dynamic here, because Aaron O'Toole, the party leader, has not been a social conservative voice himself, but he has been clear in supporting free votes. As someone who served as an MP in the last parliament, is hopefully going to be serving again in the next parliament, how do you address the concerns that some social conservative members of the party have put forward that, you know what, the leader is not necessarily where we are on these issues?
Sure. Actually, I'm able to say that I am comfortable with that, in the fact that, as you say, Aaron, it's not that he allows, it's that we have the privilege. And certainly when it comes to presenting a private member's bill, that is something that I, as a member of parliament, take very seriously. And we are well represented in the party, and we have amazing opportunities to have discussions in our caucus. I cannot imagine what it's like to be in those other parties and trying to navigate in the way that Canadians want us to on a lot of these issues. And that is to actually have conversation, actually have debate, and still hold each other in high regard. And that is certainly the approach that I took when Aaron, made it very clear that he would not be supporting the bill. But we have an opportunity in our party, and this is what I do tell a lot of my colleagues and people who do get concerned, that we have an opportunity in the Conservative Party of Canada that no other party provides to their members. And I believe that we as social conservatives have played a significant role on an awful lot of bills in the House. Specifically, you think of MAID. We had the opportunity to raise it to an issue where we got the support of every disability group across Canada as they became more and more aware of the dynamics of that bill. So that sense of where the true compassion is in this country, it's in the Conservative Party.
I think that's an important point. And I know that oftentimes social conservatives tend to get typecast into very narrow issues. People brought this up with Andrew Scheer in 2019 of, he's just trying to relitigate same-sex marriage, which wasn't the case. You have all of these coming to the forefront now on medically assisted dying, on the sex-selective abortion question. Even now with vaccinations, there are a lot of questions about personal choice and conscience rights for healthcare practitioners. And I spoke out about the assisted dying bill significantly because I'm a survivor of a suicide attempt. I've done mental health advocacy, and this was a bill where most of the mental health groups were themselves very concerned with a bill that was really legitimizing this culture that, we should take away hope from people that are in crisis. And in a lot of cases, there were even some Liberals in the Senate that seemed eventually receptive to this idea. Not enough of them, mind you, but receptive to this idea that I don't think we should be ramming this bill forward exactly as it's being presented.
Absolutely not. I had a wonderful conversation with a wonderful young man who came to me to talk about C6, the conversion therapy bill, who is gay and was concerned and was so pleased to have the conversation with me to understand the true perspective of this bill within the Conservative Party. We come at it from different angles, and, it's said that we're divided on it. We're not. We all agree that there must be a ban on conversion therapy. We just had different perspectives on how that should be done. And when we have the opportunity to form government, our shadow minister indicated right away that this is something very important to us. And, he brought up the issue of MAID and said that, if the way that they are putting it forward now had been available to him a year or two earlier, he would have taken his own life. And he is very upset that they have broadened the definition of the capability of an individual to get assisted suicide within 24 hours. And so he was very, very pleased with the approach that we as a party took on these issues.
I know we've been talking a lot about the social issues in the campaign. I think they are important, and I've never made that a secret. But I wanted to put to you what you think some of the other issues are that are going to be ballot issues for people in your riding and across the country as we go through the next few weeks.
Sure. Well, there's definitely concern in my riding about the approach that this government has taken to our freedoms. And they're very concerned about the potential of moving our whole society and our economic prosperity to an approach of, this basic income and taking away the opportunities and the privileges to be a Canadian and to become self-sufficient and to succeed in our society on the basis of everyone having the same opportunity and being able to move forward and succeed within the economy. So there's no question that securing the future is really important, that there is a real desire to see the benefits that are attached to COVID be removed so that we can get back to having people employed. So many of my businesses have signs up saying they're looking for employees and no one is coming forward. They are not able to open the way that they want to because people are not coming back to work because they have this free money available to them, and they're very concerned that he is taking advantage of the circumstances of COVID to really shut down our economy and move us to more of a state-controlled government.
Yorkton Melville Conservative candidate and longtime MP Kathy Wagenthal. Kathy, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks. We are making this a truly national discussion. I'm in Ottawa. We've got our studio in Toronto, which we'll go back to in just a moment here. And I do want to say something because this afternoon I went to Maxime Bernier's launch. The People's Party of Canada had its kickoff press conference as well. And it was actually quite astonishing how few members of the media were there. There were a couple of Radio Canada reporters. There was a CBC reporter who had phoned in, but not a lot of coverage. And I know Candice, in her chat with Hamish Marshall, addressed this to some extent. We're talking about a party that in 2019 got a relatively small percentage of the vote, but I still think it's an important aspect of the conservative movement. And certainly we hear from people all the time that are very frustrated with the status quo Conservative Party that say they're voting PPC. We have the Maverick Party. We even have some people in Quebec that are taking a bit more of a regionalist approach that isn't the Bloc Québécois. And one thing I've actually been very proud of in the coverage at True North since before I joined it, and certainly since then as well, is the interest in covering these parties that don't often make it onto the mainstream media's radar. You look at how the Green Party has been, by the media, elevated to this very significant status that is vastly larger than its actual electoral footprint. And I'm saying, well, why aren't we doing that with parties on the right? So that's a big part of what True North is doing, covering the PPC, covering the Maverick Party, covering the Conservative Party of Canada, Justin Trudeau. I even went to an NDP press conference last time. I don't know if they'll let me in this time, but that is a big part of it here. And again, I'll say, if you can support this work that we're doing, please do head on over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. And with that, we will go back to the studio with Candice Malcolm, Anthony Fury, and Sue Ann Levy.
Much for the work that you're doing on the ground in Ottawa. It's great to have reporters doing the work that I wish the mainstream media would do a little bit more. You know, you're going to the events. Just the pure fact that you went and covered the People's Party when, like you said, there's so few people that are willing to do that. I mean, Maxime Bernier was a former cabinet minister of this country. Like, if there was a left-wing cabinet minister that left the Liberal Party and started their own party, you know that the CBC would be there. You know that the mainstream media, legacy media, parliamentary press gallery would be there. And the fact that it is happening on the conservative side, it's like, no, we're too good to go there. We're too good to touch it. So I'm so pleased to have you on the ground, and hopefully you're going to continue to do these breaking reports throughout the campaign.
That's certainly the plan.
Great, thank you so much. And now we have another MP that's going to jump on with us, Garnett Jennis, and it's great to have him on the program as well. So I'll just quickly read your bio here, Garnett. Garnett is a Conservative Member of Parliament for Sherwood Park. He was first elected in 2015 and re-elected in 2019. He's the Shadow Minister for International Development and Human Rights for the official opposition. Prior to his election, Garnett worked as an advisor in the Prime Minister's office to then Prime Minister Stephen Harper. So Garnett, thank you so much for joining our program.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. And my camera may be a little funny here, so I don't know if you can see me properly, but either way, it's great to be able to have this conversation today.
Looks good and sounds good to me. So,
Okay,
Garnett, what do you make
great.
of the election being called today and kind of this new wedge issue that the Prime Minister has introduced, the idea that we need to have vaccine passports in order to travel interprovincially, and that, if you work for a federal government or a federally regulated industry, which is incredibly vast, that you need to get a vaccine passport?
Well, it's interesting because the Prime Minister himself had called these types of measures divisive in the past. The Conservative Party, I want to be very clear, is supportive of individual freedom. We're also supportive of vaccinations. We recognize the value, and we encourage people to get vaccinations. And we also believe in individual choice. And it's funny how at one time in this country, what it meant to be liberal in the small L sense was saying, that you might believe something is good and beneficial, but you're not going to try to impose that on somebody else, even if you think it's the right decision to make. We've moved away from that with the Big L Liberal Party, and I think that's quite evident today.
Of something that is entirely illiberal. You're saying that if you're not willing to get something that, look, I agree, I'm double vaccinated. I think it's incredibly important for Canadians to get vaccinated. I also know someone who had a vaccine injury when she was 2 years old, and because of it, she's actually can't get vaccinated. So it's like, what about people like that? What about people in different situations? There's polling from Statistics Canada that shows that the highest vaccine hesitancy community is Black Canadians. That some 55% of Black Canadians say that they don't want to get vaccinated. So it's so weird that we have a liberal government that is going to be imposing these kind of policies, and I hope that you Conservatives stand out against it. Garnett, you're sort of the go-to guy when it comes to human rights abuses, foreign affairs. I know that's really your wheelhouse, and you're an expert. So can you talk a little bit about what's going on in Afghanistan right now, and maybe how that might influence the election, how that will play out here in Canada?
Yeah, Candice, I'm so glad you asked that question. It is just devastating what is happening right now on so many levels, and I don't know if I even want to talk about the political implications, because I don't think that's the important thing. The important thing is that, I just saw on social media someone posted a photo of two children of an Afghan interpreter who are sleeping at the airport waiting to be airlifted out. The honor of our country is at stake here. There are people who fought alongside Canada, who stood with Canadian soldiers in their efforts, who in all likelihood are going to get left behind with their families because of a failure to evacuate people. In addition to this, we have been calling for 6 years. This was the first statement I made as an elected MP in December of 2015. We have been calling for 6 years for a special program to allow the private sponsorship of vulnerable minority communities in Afghanistan. You got this very small Sikh and Hindu community left in Afghanistan. Communities here in Canada have stood up and said, we want to provide private sponsorship. It's not a question of government dollars. We want to provide private sponsorship for a few hundred families. And the government has, despite having large representation in caucus from those communities, the government has done nothing. And now, a couple days ago, they come out and say, oh, well, we're going to take 20,000 refugees from Afghanistan. Well, it's too late. You can't just ignore all of this for 6 years and then say, oh, great, we've come up with a big number that we want to throw at the wall politically, when in actual fact people are going to get left behind. So it's devastating from a human rights standpoint, that very likely these minority communities, as well as anyone who collaborated with Western Azerbaijan, are simply going to be slaughtered by the Taliban. And our policy failure is going to leave behind these women, men, and children. It is so tragic. It is so wrong. I'm having a hard time thinking about anything else today, to be honest. Election aside, I mean, this is the honor of our country at stake here, I think we need to do so much better.
Absolutely, and so many members of our generation, Garnett, went and fought in Afghanistan. That was sort of the defining war of, for me, my early 20s. I mean, so many brave Canadian men and women risked their lives, and some lost their lives over there. And I know it must just be devastating for them to watch this total fallout and the Taliban coming off. It's truly awful. It's interesting what you mentioned, private refugee sponsorship. I won't get too into the weeds of immigration policy, but that's something that the Liberals used to resist, and then they embraced it because it was seen as a really effective, well-run policy. And so I'm a little surprised to hear that you're saying that they've turned away from that. That's just really unfortunate. Look,
just quickly, I don't think they've really embraced it. I mean, what we're hearing from private refugee sponsoring organizations across the board is that there's a piling on of red tape, and it's becoming harder for refugee sponsoring organizations to run as volunteer operations. They're being sort of required to have the level of administrative sophistication that is just harder for volunteers to do. And it's not really necessary. That the data has been there for a long time that the private sponsorship programs are just far more effective at engaging and integrating people. And they don't cost the taxpayer, right? So if you have people standing up and saying, we want to help vulnerable people around the world, we will support them in their integration. And by the way, the data shows they're more likely to be successful in Canada if they come into an existing community. Liberals generally don't believe in that because they're skeptical about the role of community organizations in the private sector, and they want to see bigger government. But in any event, this has been a 6-year project, people pushing for particular options and support for these Afghan minority communities, and unfortunately now it's probably too late.
I'm sorry to hear that. And I mean, it just makes perfect sense when it comes to private sponsorship, because it's like, who's going to be more successful in Canada? Someone who comes in, lands in an airplane, and gets a social worker that they might be able to talk to like once or twice a week, versus someone who's welcomed by a community, by a church, by a charity, who's really excited, who's done all the legwork to fundraise to bring this person to Canada. They're going to be there every step of the way to explain, this is how you get a bank account, this is how you sign your kids up for sports, this is how you, just all the basic things, how to ride a bus in Canada, things that a refugee would just really have no concept of. So I'm glad to see the Conservatives fighting for that. It's unfortunate that the Liberals aren't taking it out. I'll just ask you one question to bring it back to the campaign here. What are the Conservatives wanting Canadians to know about their party? What's a one takeaway message you would like the Canadians to know about what a Conservative alternative would be to this Trudeau Liberal government?
Yeah, so I mean, I look forward to us being able to share lots of specific plans on policy issues. But if I could try to wrap it together in sort of one concept, I think we have a government right now that is encouraging people not to think about the future. That is saying, don't worry, we're going to provide you with a lot of money that is heavily deficit financed in the short term. And Conservatives have a plan that emphasizes securing the future. That says we want to pass a better country, a more prosperous, more just, and more free country onto our children and grandchildren. And that means taking a hard look at debt and deficit. That means establishing the conditions for protecting our security, recognizing that we can't take our security for granted in the face of various foreign threats. It means we can't take our freedom for granted. All the things we have in Canada, the freedom, the prosperity, the justice we have, those things didn't fall out of the sky. We have them because of hard work and good policy in generations past. And if we step away from the things that have made us successful in the past, we're going to lose the fruits of that success. So we will have a lot to say about the specifics, but in one concept, it's about securing the future. It's about thinking about the kind of country we pass on to the next generation.
Well, that sounds inspiring. So I wish you well on the campaign. Hopefully we'll be able to catch up again. Garnett Genis, the MP for Sherwood Park, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I look forward to chatting again.
Great. Well, to everyone who's stuck with us, who's watched this entire broadcast, it's really been a pleasure to be able to share the news with you, have this conversation, break it all down. And I just want to show a contrast between what True North does and what you see in the mainstream media. This has become a little bit of a joke and a meme around True North because it's so silly. But I want to show you a clip of how Trudeau treated the CBC in particular, but in general, the legacy media during the last campaign. So here's that clip.
Not me. Hey, Liberal Party always supports the CBC.
Who's gonna taste
No, we want to slow him down.
So what you saw there was Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of the country, jokingly creating a poutine dish and serving it to the CBC, reminding all the press in attendance that the Liberals are always there for the CBC. So this is the kind of chummy relationship that you have. And I mean, if you think about it, during the last campaign, the 2015 campaign, two campaigns ago, the Conservative government was running on a pledge to keep the CBC as a status quo. They weren't even going as far as what Aaron O'Toole is saying today, and I hope he sticks to that pledge, that he will defund the English news section. Trudeau ran on a pledge of increasing the amount of money the CBC gets. Keep in mind, they get $1.2 billion a year. That organization would not exist in its current iteration or any form, perhaps, without all of that government subsidies. And at the same time, you have the CBC giving incredibly favorable news coverage to Trudeau, and Trudeau treating him to what? Buying him lunch on the campaign trail, and everyone's laughing, and Trudeau's making jokes about that. I mean, how can you really trust the CBC? It's wild. And so I'm going to make a final plea here, because if you're watching this far and you're enjoying our coverage, I really urge you to head on over to donate.tnc.news. That's our website. You can go make a donation. Consider it doesn't have to be a lot of money. If you can throw in $10 if you're enjoying this broadcast, so you can pitch in a little more, that would be great too. But the idea that so many Canadians still turn to the CBC to get news is distressing. And it is my goal. I think it's like my life mission to make Canadians aware that the news that they're getting on the CBC is not accurate. It's not a real picture of what's going on. It's not a real representation. I'll give you another example. This is perhaps the flagship reporter at the CBC these days, Rosemary Barton. And look, I don't have anything against her personally. She seems like she's, a nice woman. But the way that she covers politics in her job, I mean, she doesn't even hide her love and admiration for Trudeau. Let's play that clip.
Once I'm done politics, I'm done politics.
Last book you've read or the book you're reading?
Just finished the Patch, which was Chris Turner's history of the oil patch. But I'm also about to start the new Ken Follett, the third book that is the sequel to Pillars of the Earth.
That's your nerdy side.
That's my
sci-fi nerdy side.
No, it's not sci-fi. It's just a sweeping historical epic, I'm sure, but I haven't started it yet. So.
Oh, Prime Minister, you're so nerdy. It's so cute. It's seriously, I mean, it's parody, right? It's like they give poutine, they ask softball questions about what podcasts you're listening to. It's really not news. I mean, Sue-Ann?
I remember when he was sworn in 2 years ago, she wore this white outfit a la Hillary Clinton. I don't know why I remember that, but it was like the angel has returned to. And Candice, it's not just the CBC, although the CBC is getting the huge whack of funding, but other media have shifted to the left too. I notice on, for example, CTV, that there is this affinity, this the nightly news just absolutely fawns over Pierre Trudeau.
Slip. Yeah, might as well be the same.
Freudian slip. Yeah, Justin Trudeau. Well, and and then the local newscasts in Toronto, for example. I mean, they've all shifted.
It's interesting, and you kind of expect it from the CBC, but then you're right. Like CTV, a lot of people who are sort of proponents of public radio or public broadcasting, they'll say, "Look, you guys have the private sector one, that's CTV, and the public sector one, CBC." It's like, well, really, I mean, there are leftists that run both of them, and so that part of the problem is that Canadians aren't getting the other side of the story from either of them, and even global. I mean, there's a story out in Alberta. I don't know if you are following it too much, but the federal or the provincial government there decided to sort of run out the COVID policies, so they would no longer have lockdowns and masks and stuff. And the media just didn't like that at all, and so they started really promoting this doctor, and he was on all the stations. He was on Global, CTV, CBC. And then it turns out he was a huge NDP donor, and they didn't even bother to check it out. And it's like, they're basically just pushing this like far left vision of the world.
It's a narrative, the going narrative. I mean, I interviewed a couple of doctors during COVID who had suggested certain treatments that probably would have avoided some of the deaths that we saw, for example, in seniors' homes, the absolute, mass deaths. And they were, sidelined, mocked, called all kinds of names. And they're bright doctors. One is at Harvard.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like they have this sort of approved talking points, and this is what we're going to talk about. I know you did great work throughout the entire pandemic, digging into those long-term care facilities and retirement homes. Part of my problem, Sue-Ann, is the lack of transparency. Look, if the CBC came out and said, look, as an editorial position, our organization is liberal. We like the liberal worldview. We believe in Justin Trudeau. We're liberals. We're going to endorse him in the campaign. I would be a little bit more okay with that. But my biggest problem is the fact that they pretend to be the sort of arbiters of truth, that they're completely apolitical, they're completely neutral, and this just happens to be their coverage. And you can find biased news stories on any site. I mean, I think journalists are human, and humans have their biases.
Absolutely.
So I don't necessarily, begrudge Rosemary Barton for being so pro-Trudeau. The thing that I do begrudge is that they take $1.2 billion from the taxpayer, and they're not transparent about it. So they pretend that they're out there running this neutral campaign, and it's just incredibly frustrating.
But that's part of the narrative. The narrative is there's a real pack of people. They ask the same questions, and those who don't ask the questions, like Andrew, he jumped the gun, according to the pack this morning. Those who don't follow the party lines they attempt to sideline them. So that's why this media is so important, why True North is so important.
Well, thank you. I'll use that to transition. My producer will be happy, because I think that if you're still watching, you should definitely consider donating. Throw in a few dollars, whatever you have, because it helps us. Every dollar helps us to do more stories, break more reports, produce more content, put out more podcasts, more shows, more episodes, hire great new people, and really grow our team. It's so exciting to me, and I don't want to be one of those people who is happy at other people's misfortune, because I think it is sad when someone loses their job, when someone's profession is in jeopardy. But so often, there's so many reports of newspapers, TV stations laying people off and people losing their job in the media. And True North is doing great. We're growing, and we're appealing to more and more Canadians.
And that is the trend that we're seeing in the States as well, where online media and the alternative media are growing, and the traditional stations, the legacy media, as you call it, are losing readers, are losing listeners, viewers, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think part of it too is like authenticity, right? It's like because of the internet and what it's enabled us to do. Like when I was leaving to go to this broadcast, my in-laws were like, "Oh, what channel are you going to be on?" Because I said I'm going to go do my election show. "Oh, what channel?" It's like, "No, we don't do channel. We're available on YouTube and Facebook." And it's like I don't know what the viewership numbers were like for CTV or CBC, but I know we reach a lot of Canadians. I know, but by the time these clips are done, we reach a couple million Canadians every week. And so the fact that we're able to do that online without all of the expensive distribution networks, like we found a pretty good business model that tends to work for us. And in the U.S., it's like you're seeing that a lot, like. These sort of startups, these different groups that you know who they are. You know that Pod Save America guys, those are liberals, right? Those are Obama people, and they're left wing. You see the Daily Wire guys, okay, those guys are conservative. Some of them are pro-Trump, some of them aren't. But you know who you're getting your news from. You know where you stand. The problem I find is with the inauthentic sort of newscaster thing, where they put on this fake voice and they talk down to you and they dumb it down and they give you like these little sound bites. It's like, that's not really the news. Like, let's have a conversation about it. And to me, even just this broadcast has been pretty refreshing, like having an in-depth conversation and not just, reading a little sound clip or whatever.
And go back to when Anthony was here and he said Trudeau answered the question about wanting to have the conversation about where he goes next, the Great Reset. I thought he sounded like he was on the stage delivering a soliloquy. He was very rehearsed, I didn't find him natural at all. I thought he was doing a very good acting job, which he's obviously good at because he was a drama teacher. But I didn't find him spontaneous in the slightest.
No, I agree. Like he's not authentic. And to me it's like I don't think he's a good actor because when he's talking I'm like this is so cringe. Okay. This is a terrible time. Speaking of cringe, I know that we wanted to get to this because you were talking about it before the broadcast. I was too. This ad that seems to have gone viral for the Conservatives. So this is let's play the ad, and then we can break it all down. So this is a Conservative ad that they released, in the wake of the campaign here, and it really created a stir on social media. So let's play this Conservative ad.
Here we go again.
Daddy will get you a golden goose as soon as we get home.
No, I want one of those. I want a party with roomfuls of laughter, 10,000 tons of ice cream. I want the works. I want the whole works. Presents and prizes and sweets and surprises of all shapes and sizes. And now, don't care how I want
The majority.
All right, that was that. I don't know what to say about it. Sue-Ann, what's your take on that?
Well, I thought initially it was cringeworthy when I first saw it yesterday. And of course, all the leftists were wringing their hands in despair. The progressives were wringing their hands in despair because they said it was feminizing the prime minister and it's an attack on females.
What?
I wouldn't go that far. I just found it a little puerile, but it's memorable. Let's put it that way. You look at it and you will remember it.
It gets stuck in your head, right?
Yeah.
That's why I almost think, like, I know I saw the reaction and there were a lot of like high profile Conservatives that were like slamming it, which is, you almost don't really get that very often in Canada, like because of our parliamentary system. Like, usually, especially in an election, the MPs will do what the leader says. You had MPs, you had former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall, dissing it. But look, I think it does sort of what it's intended to do, which it gets people talking about the Conservatives. And, part of the problem that Aaron O'Toole has is he's sort of failing to break through and create a big name for himself. A lot of people still don't really know who he is or not familiar. And this is something, it's like, how many views has that got? How many news stories are there? How many, television stations are playing it in the nightly news? And I know we've been hard on the legacy media, and I wish that their numbers were smaller, but the reality is a lot of people still do get their news from the legacy media. So the fact that they're getting all of this free advertising, I think it might be one of those like no publicity is bad publicity kind of things.
No negative publicity, yeah.
And yeah, like it's very like internet native, right? It's like this like weird old video that has like Trudeau's face, and then the most awkward part is like the very end where it's like, don't care how I want it, and then it says like Conservative, or it says majority election or whatever, and it's like,
well, it puts it down to the bare facts, and I mean the bare his motives. So yeah, it is memorable, and in a way, having now watched it again a couple of times, it portrays him as, frankly, the narcissist and the childish narcissist that he is. I mean, if you want to read between the lines, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and that's why, in some ways, on like a weird meta level, it works. Let's bring Andrew Lawton on this. I know he had his comments and he had his thoughts on it. Andrew, what do you think about this?
You guys are going soft. This was an absolutely terrible ad. I think it's the exception to the all publicity is good publicity rule. But here's where I disagree with the media reaction on this. Why does it have to be sexist? Why can't it just be a bad commercial? Because at first I'm like, oh yeah, this is hokey and cringeworthy. And then it's like, oh, well, it's actually, it says that, the Conservatives are like whiny little girls and girls are bad. I was like, it's just a dumb thing. But I was hoping Aaron O'Toole would lean into it. I sent a message to producer Phil this morning. I said, you know what? I'm really hoping that Aaron O'Toole will do the Wonka entrance to his press conference and just, limp out and then flip into like the somersault and the hop up. But alas, it was not to be.
Because it's a liberal hack machine. But the top story wasn't about Trudeau calling an election. It was about this ad and how horrible it was. And it like just really, triggered the media. The fact that it kind of goes back to our ongoing criticism about them, that instead of writing about the topics that matter to Canadians, they're obsessed with process. They're obsessed with criticizing Conservatives for silly things, and they won't focus on the things that actually matter to Canadians. And I thought that this story just sort of summed it all up.
And
And one thing I will say on this is that whatever I think of the ad, and it may have missed the mark on this, the media is never, ever the target audience for these sorts of things. There have been a lot of situations where, not just with Aaron O'Toole, but with other leaders, provincial, federal, different parties in the past, where the media just completely loses their minds, but it was not meant to be for them. And them not getting it kind of proves the point of it. And like I said, I don't know if this is one of those cases for sure, but there have been a lot of those. I mean, one notable example was when Aaron O'Toole was apparently a dirty misogynist because his wife gave him a beer when he got home from a run. And it's like no one real cares about that. No one real had a problem with that. So I guess that's the one saving grace, is just because the media does decide to push something into trend does not mean that average Canadians are taking issue with it in the same way.
It was the same shameless double standard of the media, because remember, it's not too long ago that the Unifor ad came out with the truck falling apart and criticizing Aaron O'Toole. And we didn't hear the same outcry from the legacy media about that, did we?
Yeah, no, I think we have that clip, actually, if we can throw to that, because it was just such a silly concept. I felt like they got it all wrong, and it really illuminates so much that's wrong with the media. If we have that clip, let's throw to that.
But they're reinforcing the same stereotype about the Conservatives. That's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to do, absolutely. Do we have the clip? Is there audio on that?
Engineered by big corporations to leave us behind. Driven to cut healthcare and public services, just like Jason Kenney. Another out-of-touch politician at a price we can't afford. Meet the 2021 O'Toole. New name, same old Conservative.
And that spoke entirely to the stereotypes that these brazen people, entitled unions, try to portray about the Conservatives, that they're inhumane, they're going to cut all these things, when the point is, if there's not enough money, if there's a deficit, you can't fund all these things in perpetuity.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting because I was talking earlier in the program how I thought that Aaron O'Toole has shown incredible discipline throughout this campaign so far, because one of the sort of like things that Conservatives are good at, and I talked about how Aaron O'Toole is running as a fiscal Conservative, and he's not touching the social issues, and he's not going into the culture war stuff, and he's doing a pretty good job focusing on what his strengths are. But one of the problems that Conservatives have with running as fiscal Conservatives is that it tees them up for the easy critique that they're going to cut healthcare. That like anytime you have a fiscal Conservative, that means that they're not going to be able to overspend and blow the budget the way that left-wing politicians do, which equates to cuts to healthcare. And the Liberals are really good at sort of that wedge issue and that critique. And it's almost like Unifor was expecting Aaron O'Toole to say, I'll balance the budget in a year, or I'll balance the budget in 2 years. And so they had this whole thing, oh, he's going to cut healthcare. And then Aaron O'Toole didn't do that. He came up and said, it's going to take a long time. Trudeau really ramped this thing up, and we're in a pandemic, and it's going to take a while. So I feel like that ad just didn't work, because that's not what Aaron O'Toole was talking about. It wasn't correct. I know we had a True North fact checker go through it all, and it was like barely anything in that ad is true, but I just don't feel. And it's sort of funny because there's this culture war issue that is going on about pickup trucks, because it's sort of left-wing elite now are saying, let's ban pickup trucks. They don't, people don't need them. And it's like, of course they had to show a pickup truck as Aaron O'Toole.
It's so stereotypical of, these rural Conservatives driving an old dusty pickup truck through the prairies, and they're not elite, sophisticated. They don't drink the latest wine. I mean, it's just so old school. It makes me crazy when I see it.
Can I just say that ad brought to you by Canada's largest union of journalists. I know we've written about it. I've talked about it on my show, but I think that point bears repeating.
Absolutely, Andrew. And it's so bizarre to me. I mean, we're talking about how the CBC gives the Liberals this like very easy softball questions. It's not even softball. It's like oh, Justin, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like,
no, it's like T-ball.
Yeah, but it's like, well,
what books do you read?
Yeah, keep in mind that the largest journalist union is running ads against Aaron O'Toole. In some ways, I wish Aaron O'Toole would smack back a little. I wish he would like channel his inner Ron DeSantis or Chris Christie and just smack down some of these journalists when they ask bad questions. It's like, your union is running an attack ad against me in the campaign. Like, I can't trust you. You can't trust these people to ask fair questions, to report in an honest way. We know what their politics are, and again, that's the point I'll reiterate: is that at True North, you know where we stand. You know what our worldview is. You know, we run fact-based news reports, but when it comes to the editorial, when it comes to me and Andrew and Sue Ann, you know, we're going to be talking about our values and our vision of the world, and that tends to be more conservative. But we're not going to, you know, carry water for politicians. We're independent, and you know where we stand. The problem is that so many of these Unifor journalists, so many of these CBC journalists, you don't know where they stand, and unfortunately, Canadians aren't really aware of how biased and how the structures are stacked against them. So again, if you're watching and you feel inclined, you want to support True North, I really, really encourage you to do it. It's so important in this country in this time. And I know there's sort of a cliche that every election is the most important election, but you know, we're here at the end of the pandemic. We have a Trudeau government that's just racked up an insane amount of debt, that has no vision for the country, going in a wrong direction. And it's an important election, and I think that Canadians deserve coverage, in-depth coverage, showing them the other side of the story, breaking reports, telling stories that aren't told, having analysis that you won't find on other channels. And that's what you get in True North. And so if you can and if you're able, donate.tnc.news. Go over there right now. Consider making any donation you can. Seriously, $10 is amazing, and we're happy for every dollar we get.
In my 31 years covering politics and 20 full-time, voters are very forgetful. They forget very quickly what happened 2 months ago, 3 months ago. But let's not forget that Justin Trudeau has been a huge embarrassment on the world stage. So this sort of dapper, charming guy who was supposed to be, don't forget that he was dressing in Indian costumes when he was in India. I don't forget these things. And, you know, is this the kind of person that we want going, you know, and the legacy media will choose to forget that sort of stuff, not cover it, not remind voters. And that's a sad thing.
It's funny because when that happened, when that scandal dropped, it was so shocking because it was so sort of counter to the Trudeau that we see, and we talk about him as being a drama teacher and an actor. But you know, he was someone that really talked a good game, condemning racists and being open-minded and saying diversity is strength over and over again. And then he did something that was, I wouldn't call it racist, but it was pretty borderline. Like it showed a very poor judgment. You sort of painting your skin
things,
up.
Yeah, the blackface, and then posing on the steps of the Taj Mahal, all dressed, the whole family dressed in Indian outfits.
That was just very silly.
It was stupid.
It does show.
Well, and remember when the blackface story came out, one of his defenses was that he's always just gotten a little carried away with costumes. Like that's just his thing. He just does costumes with gusto.
And that's supposed to give us like what comfort that he's the leader of our country. Like, it's okay, guys. He just likes dressing up. That's just his thing. Like, it's certainly very silly. Well, I was able to catch up with one more MP that I want to show you the interview with, Tom Kamek, out in Calgary, and we had a great conversation. Here's that clip. Is there audio? Why are we having this election? First things first.
Because the Prime Minister wants a majority government, and he doesn't want to have to negotiate with any opposition party or anybody who has any semblance of another opinion, another idea in their head. He wants full and complete control of Parliament, which is what we've come to expect from him.
Okay, so Trudeau has been Prime Minister now for what, 5 years? Do you think that he in any way deserves a majority? I mean, the reason that he's putting this test to Canadians is because he clearly believes that he deserves a majority government. Do you think he deserves that?
Well, I don't think he deserves it, but I also don't think he deserved a second chance in 2019, and I don't think he deserved the first chance back in 2015 either. But every election is about earning the trust of Canadians and earning the right to govern. And he hasn't earned that right to govern this so far. In 2019, citizens in Canada were really clear, electors were really clear. They wanted to punish the Liberal government, and so they punished them. They took away the majority government, said to him and to his key cabinet ministers, you're going to have to negotiate with opposition parties. And that hasn't been the case for the past 2 years. He's held Parliament hostage. He tried to shut us down for extended periods of time. He's, treated opposition parties more so as an audience rather than, equal participants in the democratic process. So absolutely, he doesn't deserve it. Especially speaking as a Westerner, he does not deserve another chance. I can't afford another 4 years of Justin Trudeau.
Well, let's pick up on that. You said speaking as a Westerner. So how will Western values play out? I know there's been a bit of a surge basically since Trudeau has been in office, but we've heard a lot about this sort of grumbling of Western alienation. There's some talk of Western separatism. That's always a movement that we're seeing on the fringes, and now it's starting to pick up a bit of steam. So how will sort of Western concerns and values play out in this campaign?
Well, like I always make the distinction, there's like the West and there's like prairie Canadians, those of us on the east side of what many derogatorily call, flyover country. And I don't think of this as flyover country. This Alberta, where I'm from, is the greatest province in Canada. I'm sorry, every other province is just the truth. This is the greatest place to earn a living, to raise a family, and to have opportunities you'll find nowhere else. And that's why it attracts so many Canadians from all across the country to come here to work and to raise a family. And what's different about Western Canada is we have a long history of changing, the political makeup of Canada. The Reform Party started out here. The Social Credit Party started out here. The populist movement started out here. The progressive movement started out here. We have a long history of changing how Canada works and also bringing new ideas to the front. Ideas like, Triple E Senate, ideas like reforming the House of Commons the way members of Parliament do their work. And in this election, we really saw it, like my leader, Aaron O'Toole, the very first announcement he did is like the touchiest of all issues, which is equalization. He took my private members bill and made it one of the central pieces of our campaign in the prairie provinces. We're going to completely get rid of a lot of the rules that are really hurting Alberta and Saskatchewan and giving us back the full equalization rebate, because when our economies are hurting, we can't contribute as much to the public treasury in personal income taxes and in other income taxes. We should see a huge rebate on the huge contributions that we've made to Confederation. It's only fair, and that's just the kind of the opening salvo, as I call it, of all the fixes we're going to bring to Confederation on behalf of prairie Canadians specifically.
That's great. I'm glad you're talking a little bit about policy, because sometimes during elections, we only talk about strategy, we only talk about the horse race, and we never really get an opportunity to talk about the policy and how a conservative government would be different than a liberal government. So you touched a little bit on it, but maybe you can help explain to our viewers, explain to the audience how a conservative government would be different than the liberal government. How would you do things differently? What would Canada look like, in 5 years with a conservative government in place?
So this is just day one essentially, or like 3/4 of day one of what the election campaign will be like. So we've already put out our innovation policy of what we think will be best set for small and medium enterprise to innovate in Canada, keep their patents here, commercialize in Canada. You saw some of that in this week. And then how would we govern? Respecting the traditions, respecting Parliament as an institution that makes decisions. Government is supposed to go there and check with the people's representatives to double check with them. This is what you want to do. This is the direction we like to go in. We can tinker with some of the ideas that a government proposes, but generally Parliament is there to give its final stamp of approval. Whereas with the Liberal government, Parliament has just been a stamp of approval. There's no consideration, no debate. Debate doesn't matter. Rushing things through as fast as possible. We've said, for example, that we'll balance the budget over the next 10 years. I have a lot of supporters, and I'm one of those. I consider myself a fiscal conservative through and through. I'd love to be able to balance the budget faster. But what we're facing here, and what the parliamentary budget officer has said, at the present pace of how the Liberals are spending, we won't have a balanced budget till 2070. Now, that's unacceptable. You can't have future taxpayers bearing the burden of services that they haven't consumed, that they haven't used. So we'll introduce a few more ideas as we go. We're going to manage the public finances in terms of how we spend and where we spend those monies. Finding ways to save and economize, to use that favorite UK Tory term, economize wherever we can in the provision of public services, because people have an expectation. They pay taxes, and there's a public service that's supposed to come to them on the opposite end. What they don't want to see is things like, the We Charity scandal. They don't want to see hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts going to great constituents of the finance minister just because they feel that's the best way to do things. They want, it's almost like a fee-for-service concept. So we'll take 10 years to make sure we balance the budget in a way where we're not chopping away at services that Canadians have come to expect and to rely on, and also to draw down as quickly as possible a lot of this emergency spending that was approved, because the vast majority of the spending that's been approved so far has been spent to help Canadians during the pandemic, and I don't think anybody complains about it. But between, I think the last numbers I saw, $100 to $125 billion, even third-party reviewers have said have nothing to do with pandemic spending. They're just additional spending the government has decided to do. So that's kind of on the policy end of what we're interested in doing. We have some ideas on innovation. I have some ideas I'm hoping that will be center stage in our policy platform, specifically on bereavement leave that I've been working on for the last few months. So I think what they'll see from us is both quite a fiscally conservative platform that will speak to Canadians' want for a balanced budget, which has been the accepted political concept of the last decade since the Reform Party brought it to the very front of public policy debates in Canada. And the second part is a kind of a compassionate conservatism, looking after people in a way that's reasonable, but doesn't impose on future taxpayers an enormous cost that they're simply supposed to accept and bear. There has to be a balance between future taxpayers and present needs and wants. And that's what we're going to be proposing as we go forward. It's going to be a battle of ideas. I always tell people that it's not about the personalities. You may like or you may dislike Justin Trudeau and the other Liberals, but it's a battle of ideas. That's what every single election is supposed to be about. Who has the better ideas? Who has the better vision? We're the only party that wants to secure the future of Canadians, secure their jobs, secure the economy. And if a voter wants one of the other options, there's lots of other options for maximum spending, maximum taxation, and the status kind of state of things as they are right now. If they want more of what's been done during the pandemic, they got lots of options there. If they want a party that's entirely focused on jobs, the economy, and securing our future, there's only the Conservative Party of Canada.
Well, it's quite the pitch. I will leave it at that because I don't think there's anything else that we can add. But thank you so much for your time, Tom. And I look forward to seeing you throughout the campaign. Conservative MP Tom Kmitch.
Thank you, Candice.
That was Tom Kmitch, big supporter of independent media. So thanks to him for coming on the show. Had a few questions I wanted to get to just as we wind down our show here and put them to the whole team. The first one, a few people have asked this, but we're attributing it to the one who asked it best, Paula in Saskatoon, who says the Conservatives booted social conservative Pierre Lemieux and Yukon candidate Jonas Smith, who opposed mandatory vaccines. As a lifelong Conservative Party of Canada supporter, I'm very disappointed by the CPC and Aaron O'Toole. The question is, can the Conservatives motivate the base? This is, I'm just going to say up front, a big question, and one that I think certainly will color our coverage in the course of the campaign, because a lot of people have put very similar concerns. Candice in the studio, what do you think of this?
Well, Andrew, you were the one first, credit where credit is due. You broke that story about Pierre Lemieux, and you obviously have your finger on the pulse of this issue. And so for sure, it's distressing. I mean, the idea that the Conservatives are a big tent party, and that was sort of part of what Aaron O'Toole promised. He tells us that he's true blue. I think he has an explanation that is owed to the base, because as you were mentioning in your interview that you did earlier with the MP, the idea is that the Conservative Party is different from the other parties. So we already have 3 left-wing parties. We already have 3 parties that basically have the same view when it comes to almost everything. When it comes to abortion, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to the economy, debt, deficit. There's so many things that are already the same about all those parties. And the beauty of the Conservative Party and the movement is that there is more room for actual exchange of ideas and discourse. And that's what I love about conservatism, is that you don't always have to have the same views as the people on your side. I mean, conservatism is made up of classical liberals, of libertarians, of social conservatives, of free market people. I mean, there's so many different types of conservative. You could be someone that really stresses order and tradition. You can be a conservative that really believes in freedom and the rights and freedoms of Canadians. And so I like a big tent. I like the idea that there is room for different views and different ideas. And I think Erin O'Toole certainly owes an explanation. How about you, Sue-Ann?
Well, I think one thing I found covering politics over the years is the Conservatives are not good at keeping their internal squabbles internal. Liberals are adept at it. They, you don't hear anything as much as they, have issues, whether it be Ontario or federally. They keep it all in under their tent.
Or you're out of the party, right? Like
yeah, or you're
Jody Wilson-Raybould is just out, right?
Yeah, but the Conservatives, they're all this sort of out there. I agree with you. It's a big tent, and they got to keep it all together, and that's the challenge of any leader. And I was disappointed personally as well that this happened.
Certainly. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, it's tough because this was one of the big pitches that Erin O'Toole made during the leadership to social conservatives. And we talked about this a little bit earlier with Kathy Wagenthal. It was, I'm not one of you, but I believe you have a place in the party. And that was a big contrast between Erin O'Toole and Peter MacKay, who had famously called social conservatives the stinking albatross hanging around the neck of the 2019 Conservative campaign. So when you had a series of ejections, you had Derek Sloan, you had Pierre Lemieux, you had a couple of others in there where people were thinking, whoa, hang on, this is not what we thought was going to happen. It does threaten that big tent issue that the party has always tried to claim. And I think that's going to be a big thing going forward, because you can never, I mean, the line, it's not mine. It actually came from Mark Stein, but I think it bears quoting here, is that it's a lot easier for the base to get itself a new leader than for a leader to get itself a new base. And that's a big issue that conservative leaders in general, I think, need to remember. I also wanted to go to another question.
Chief, just remind you one other thing. It's that, when it comes to conservatives, Erin O'Toole is basically betting this entire election on the idea that he can win on just fiscal issues, economic issues. And I've given him credit throughout the show. I think that he's been very disciplined and very good. And it kind of goes, there's sort of a conventional wisdom, and I think it really derives from the media, that if conservatives just run on fiscal issues, if they ditch the divisive social issues, if they don't go into the Trump-style culture wars, if they just focus on their strength, which is fiscal issues, then they'll be accepted, and then they'll be won over, and Canadians will accept them. Canadians aren't willing to accept sort of right-wing values. And I think that this election is a test of that theory, because we've heard it so much. We heard it a lot after Andrew Scheer was unsuccessful in removing Prime Minister Trudeau. And I think that Erin O'Toole is basically just doing this experiment, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Is that theory true? That if the Conservatives just simply run on the sort of free market, libertarian economic ideas and don't touch the social stuff, if they'll be able to win over Canadians? And I'm truly interested to see how this turns out, because I think O'Toole, like I said before, is doing a pretty decent job of just being disciplined and sticking to that message.
Yeah. I think the old James Carville line, it's the economy, stupid. And I guess my theory would be, and we can certainly discuss this when we look back from election night, my theory is that there are a lot of questions that Canadian voters have answers to that aren't going to be answered by a very narrow platform dealing just with the economy, especially when you talk to new Canadians who have a number of issues that they would not issues, but a number of questions, a number of things about which they care that go beyond, this tax rate and this tax credit. And certainly that's something we'll see unfold. And kind of a related question, because I think the fracturing of the Conservative Party into these different groups and parties is, I think, part of this idea of the big tent eroding slightly. Derek in Toronto says, do smaller parties like the PPC and the Maverick Party have a chance to pick up a few seats this election? I'm not going to answer that directly, Derek, because we did have some of that discussion with Hamish Marshall, and it's come up earlier. But I am going to say that I think they have a place in the discussion. I think they have a place in the conservative movement, because anytime someone leaves an established party that's been around effectively since Confederation, albeit through iterations, it's because there's something in that party that they feel is not speaking to their needs. And you can say, oh, it's petty, or it's, based on narcissism and all of these things that people say about the Mavericks and the PPC and all of that. But these are still real issues that a conservative party needs to address. And I know that when that initial split happened between the CPC and the PPC back just before the 2019 election, a lot of the people who had been involved in the Reform PC merger, the Alliance PC merger, were the most annoyed because they saw how difficult it was to unite the right at that time. So I think they're concerns that need to be heard, but I'll throw it to you both back in the studio.
I'll just say, I don't think that the big issue is whether or not these parties will be able to win seats. I think the bigger issue is how many seats will this spoil for the Conservatives, because that's far more likely that PPCs will pick up 1,500 votes, and that'll be the difference between a Conservative and a Liberal. And it does sort of teach Conservative leaders a lesson about this is what happens when you neglect the base, when you ignore the base, when you push out someone like Maxime Bernier, who, let's all remember, he got 49% of the vote in the leadership election to replace Stephen Harper as leader. He was very, very close to winning. And if it was a differently organized system, he probably would have been leader of that party and done things very differently. So there are consequences to pushing out popular candidates that articulate a different style of conservatism. And like I said before, the beauty of conservatism is that there are these different planks and there's different ways of looking at the world through conservative lens, and they keep it all together. I mean, we're talking about small parties that aren't really going to win a lot of seats. Look at the left. Look at how split and divided the left is. And imagine if they were as united as the Democrats are in the U.S. I mean, they would win probably every election, and there would have to be a major reshuffle in the way that Canadian politics were done if the NDP, Green, and Liberals were all combined. So there's much more vote splitting that happens on the left than on the right. But I think it's certainly interesting to watch, and it will be a factor in this election. What do you think, Sue-Ann?
I think, take a look at Doug Ford in Ontario. He's a populist leader, even more so his brother as mayor of Toronto. And I think the split is partly because the loss of connection with the grassroots and with the people who matter, who vote, and are very much affected by what's happened with the pandemic or the economy. I think there is a danger in focusing just on the economy and numbers, because really a budget speaks to where you're going to spend your money. Where are you going to, and the questions are going to come up. Are you going to spend money on bringing more refugees to Canada? What do you think of the refugee policy, for example? I mean, all these things are spill over into policy issues. The budget merely determines, like, spending
what your priorities are.
What your priorities are. But getting back to the splintering of the parties, I think CPC has to be very aware, and I agree with you about splitting the vote. That's a real concern. But they have to be very aware that they can't lose touch with the base, with the grassroots.
Absolutely, and when they do, there are consequences, and it's really interesting to see how that plays out, because I think you're right. When it comes to fiscal issues, it doesn't really tell us about your character. It doesn't really tell us about your values, about what your priorities are. And we gotta get to know you a little bit more as a leader of the Conservative Party in order to sort of entrust you. And I think that's a better strategy in terms of growing the party base. But again, I think that O'Toole, we'll see how the strategy plays out. And I think that he does have a vision, he has a strategy, and I certainly give him credit for that. Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning into this broadcast. I know it hasn't been perfect, it hasn't been seamless, but this is our first time doing something like this in a studio. And, given how we just found out that there was an election today, we didn't have a lot of time to put it all together. But I really want to give my thanks to the people who are here behind the scenes. So I'm going to give a little shout out to Phil, our executive producer, Harrison, our intern, who's doing a great job, and Chris, who's our in-studio technical expert here. You guys have been tremendous, and I truly thank you for sticking through with us and doing a great job. So thank you. And to the audience at home, this is the kind of thing that we want to be able to bring you more and more throughout the campaign. Our next event, which is planned just like this, we're going to be at a studio similar to this. I think we're probably going to end up having more of it in studio. So make sure we have Andrew Lawton here, make sure we have Hamish here in person, and have a really in-depth discussion. We're going to do it on the night of the English debate, which I believe is it September 8th or September 9th? September 9th, and we will be back in this studio. So I hope that you'll be able to join us. If you've enjoyed this podcast and this product, again, I urge you to head over to donate.tnc.news. Consider making a small donation. It really helps us out. And, we have a big, ambitious goal for this campaign. I truly think this is a huge opportunity for us at True North. We've talked a lot about the politicians and what's at play for them and, what's going to happen to our country. But I think a lot of what's going to happen to our country is the future of the media. And watching over the last 5 years what's happened to this media, how they've all fallen over for Justin Trudeau, how they've gone hat in hand asking for bailouts, how they suck up to him, and how they condemn us and treat us like we're an opposition party. Look at the way that Andrew Coyne was tweeting about Andrew Lawton, like how dare he get a question in. It's like, hi, we're journalists too, and we actually went to court during the last election campaign to prove that, and a federal judge ruled in favor of True North, saying you're journalists and you are able to report. We're willing to go to any ends, and I think it's so important for Canada as a country. Forget about True North and us and what we're doing, but for Canada as a country to have places where you can go and get the honest truth and hear people speaking honestly and not, sound clips and talking points and just the same stuff that we're just so used to seeing in legacy media. So if you're on board with our mission and you want to be a part of it, head on over to donate.tnc.news and be a part of our campaign, be a part of our movement. It's really, really, really exciting. The campaign is going to be a great opportunity for us to reach more and more Canadians. We're reaching millions of Canadians every single week, and we want to reach even more. So if you can help us with our mission, please do. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been so much fun. Sue-Ann, thank you for
I've had a great time
having us, being here the whole night, and we're going to definitely have you back on election night if you're around, and at the debate, that would be great to have you. So thank you for coming out, and thank you to the viewer. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. God bless. We'll see you again soon.